Hello and welcome to the Australian Roundtable podcast. Today is Sunday, April 12, 2015. This is episode number 27 of our weekly broadcast. I'm your host, John LeBon, and I'm joined in the studio by Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here, Jono.
And we are linked via Google Hangout to our resident wise old elder, the silver fox himself, Lindsay. Thanks for being there.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it.
No worries, mate. Well, for new listeners, the ARP is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion panel podcast which broadcasts live every Sunday from 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Live listeners can take part in a live chat forum at the YouTube channel during broadcasts. All episodes are archived at that channel and are also available in MP3 format for you to download for free from our website, ozroundtable.com. Views presented by individual panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel, and all important information cited during the broadcast will be linked to at our website, ozroundtable.com, so you can verify and analyse it for yourself, which we always recommend you do. Episodes generally run for 2 hours, and although it is a roundtable discussion, we do keep to a rough structure for each episode, generally breaking it up into a domestic and international segment. So here is the rundown for today's show. We've got 6 topics in domestic. I'll run through them briefly. Vaccines made compulsory for welfare, media ownership law reforms, more Reclaim Australia rallies, Senate inquiry into tax avoidance, don't bank on action regarding the High Court with banks and Queensland Police, anonymous donations, and then in international we'll look at Facebook controlling the news. That's a feature piece from Ethan. I'm looking forward to that. Dieudonne, a French comedian, and free speech. And if we get time, we'll also have a look at the latest updates from the Boston Hoaxathon. But before we get to any of that, boys, we always like to say good day and see how things are. Lindsay, I'll throw to you first there, mate. How you been?
Yeah, good, thanks. And it's been a really good week of news. It's such a variety of things that have come up. I don't know how we're going to fit it all in.
Well, we'll do our best. And Ethan, it's always good to have you in the studio. We've got a big Sunday sessions coming up later in the evening. We'll talk about that in the Today Show, but it's good to have you here, mate. How you been?
Not too bad, Jono. 27 weeks in of the Australian Roundtable. It's gone quick, hasn't it, my friend?
It has. You know, sometimes I think of the weeks of this show being like the years of my life, and we're now at the same number of weekly episodes as years of my life, Ethan, and I kind of feel like we've matured roughly the same. We got to about episode 15, 16, and we were still finding our way, but here we are, mate. I feel like we're kicking goals. What do you reckon?
I think we're doing all right.
Well, I tell you who else is doing all right. Our friends at NASA. And Lindsay, I know that you've got an article for us. Apparently NASA are promising that they're going to find aliens for us within a decade.
That is correct. This was in the Courier Mail on the 9th of April. So I'll read you the headline. We'll find aliens by 2025. That was NASA. Anyway, I'll read you a little quote out of it so you know where they're going. Washington, that's the date line. There are at least 200 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy, and now NASA officials claim we could be on the verge of finding life on one of them. The Space Agency yesterday announced that humanity was likely to encounter extraterrestrials within a decade. NASA Chief Scientist Ellen Stofan said, I believe we are going to have a strong indication of life beyond Earth in the next decade, and definitely, I love that word definitely, evidence in the next 10 to 20 years. That really is quite specific, isn't it? Anyway, Jeffrey Newmark, Interim Director of Heliophysics at the agency, said it's definitely, again, not if, it's a when. So they really are going to find it. We can define this not maybe announcement by NASA in conjunction with the warnings of Wernher von Braun, the father of rocket science and the NSA space program, where he was so horrified by their plan, which he'd seen details of, for a worldwide genocide. He warned the next thing to happen will be a false ET attack, so that more legislation against people can be rushed through as an emergency measure. So I sort of combined the two. I knew he'd said that, and as soon as I saw this, it struck a chord with me. I thought, hello, because it's not like they're saying we could, or, you know, they've been saying there's no such thing for years, and now suddenly it's definite. Okay, I'll throw it back to you.
Well, I guess there's a few things there, Lindsay, and for any new listeners, we like to start the show off with something a bit lighthearted before we get into the actual content of the show. And I saw that one on your agenda, and I thought, isn't this amusing? We've been talking about NASA lately, and a lot of our listeners know that I can't speak for Ethan and for you, Lindsay, but a lot of our listeners know that I'm very skeptical of just about everything that NASA ever says. And now that they've come out and said they're going to find proof of aliens within 10 years, I wonder if more people are going to start to wake up to the fact that NASA's a fraud. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, I agree, Jono. Without getting into a bigger discussion about our beliefs, because you know that I don't necessarily have the same views about extraterrestrials that I hold about NASA. That is, that NASA's completely hiding information from us and is completely set up to lie to the masses about what's really around us in the sky. I just thought this article was amusing, but on a serious note, Lindsay mentioned what I was going to mention, and that was that there was talk that eventually they're going to stage, as a final chapter of this New World Order, One World Government, they're going to stage a false flag alien invasion to unite the planet. We've seen with the War of the Worlds podcast as a precedent in the 20th century what can happen when people are afraid into that. And George Bush has said at the United Nations Council how easily our differences would all go aside if we faced a threat from an external source, So even though this is a funny article of just more NASA propaganda garbage where they've said definitely, within the next 10 years, definitely we'll find aliens, this could be planting the seeds early, Jono.
Well, I've been going through the fakeologist.com back catalogue for the last little while, just getting myself more acquainted with the work they do. And I was listening to an interview they did with Simon Shack of September Clues from like 2 years ago. And I was listening to that just yesterday, and they made the point about Independence Day, the film. You know that movie with Will Smith and that other dude, I forget his name. Anyway, when you think about it, they actually are kind of implanting the seeds in your mind. Like all the countries have to come together to fight. They even had like Australian, like there's footage of like the Sydney Harbour Bridge and like an alien ship crashing into Sydney Harbour. The whole world coming together. They do plant the seeds early. But the reason we brought that one up, Lindsay, was just to have a quick laugh at NASA. That's probably going to be a running joke for us from now on, I'd say. It is time to. We've got a lot of topics to get through today, so we'll try and get into it straight away. I should just say quickly, we're up to about 32 people watching live right now, so thanks to everyone for joining. Grub9, who I've never seen before, is in the live chat, so hello to you and hello to all of our new listeners. The first topic for domestic today, Ethan, is to do with vaccines having been made compulsory here in Australia for welfare. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. This was probably the most concerning piece, and that's why we need to get straight into it immediately, because it probably will take up some time because it's extremely important, and that is that the Abbott government set to announce anti-vaccination parents are going to lose their benefits. And I'll just read out an article from the Sydney Morning Herald here from April 11th, which was Saturday, yesterday. And I'll just read it out real quick before we can get into a broader discussion, and I talk about some of the precedents that have been set previously by other governments. It says parents who do not vaccinate their children will lose welfare payments of up to $2,100 per child under a federal government policy set to be announced before the May budget. Under changes that could save more than $50 million a year, Social Services Minister Scott Morrison is preparing to scrap a, quote, conscientious objection, unquote, provision which allows anti-vaccination parents to still claim welfare benefits, including childcare assistance and Family Tax Benefit A. Fairfax Media understands that the Family Tax Benefit A is worth up to $2,100 per child. Parents of about 39,000 children have signed conscientious objection forms that certify they have a, quote, personal, philosophical, religious, or medical objection to immunization. This form, which requires a consultation with a doctor or immunization nurse, is necessary for the parents to receive Family Tax Benefit A, but access is means tested, so not every one of those parents would be receiving the payment. And it goes on to talk about demonizing anti-vaccine groups again and talk about the benefits of vaccines, etc., etc. But this is something that before the show last week, Jono, we were speaking about, hey, have you seen they're trying to make another push towards mandatory vaccine? And we said, oh, well, it's sort of just in the opening stages now. Maybe we'll save it for another week. We've got a big week to go. And then all of a sudden, within the span of a week, they've announced that before the May budget, it's set to be expected that they're going to announce that they're going to scrap Family Tax Benefit A and a number of other benefits, Jono.
Yeah, well, as soon as I saw this one, because every Sunday morning I just check the news, what's been trending, go through my bookmarks, check Lindsay's agenda, and I saw this one came up just this morning, that they've now officially said we are not going to give welfare benefits. And of course, you have to understand, especially for an international listener, that Australia isn't far off being just as socialist as many parts of Europe, you know what I mean? many people, like there are even families who earn over $100,000 who are still receiving benefits from the government, whether that's through tax concessions or through outright transfer payments. So when they say that if you don't get your kids vaccinated, you'll miss out on welfare or what have you, they're not talking about like just the poor people, okay? They're talking about the vast majority of Australians who are getting this information, who might be parents, are being told essentially, if you want the money that's due to you, you have to vaccinate your kids. There's no two ways about it. So it's a huge deal. And like you said, even though they've been planting the seeds for a little while, this sudden hit of no, you now have to get it done or no cash, it's really come almost out of the blue, Lindsay. What say you?
Yeah. I was absolutely, well, before we came on air, I had a bit of a swear and carry on. It really upset me this morning when I read the paper because it was in there. And I think the one thing that I saw that it's only one small sentence, I'll just read it. News Corp No Jab, No Play campaign has scored a stunning victory with bipartisan support for the conscientious objector loophole to be closed to protect all children. And they've come out and said it because in my agenda I spoke about all the letters to the editor this week were all anti-vaccination. Pro-vaccination. Anti-anybody who was against vaccination. And obviously they'd rigged the whole letters to the editor, which they do from time to time. But I didn't realise that they'd come out and admit that they were the force behind it. And it just infuriated me. And it infuriated me that Abbott was coming out and saying, I'm a father, and I want the best for the children. Well, look after your own kids. Don't start telling everybody else how to run their families. Now, look at that. I didn't swear once when I said that. No. I was really furious about it. And I thought, this is no different to this Campbell Newman trying to run our lives and tell us what we can and can't do and stepping way outside their... They haven't got a prerogative to do this. And I think the best thing that could happen to Abbott was he toss him out on his ear like Newman, and they might get a bit of a shock to their system and bring them back to some reality. We're the sovereigns in this nation, not them. They're our representatives. About time they remembered that. Anyway, I'll let it back to you before I do start swearing.
No, Lindsay, you're absolutely right. And you mentioned the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph rather, and I've got a bit of an article here to talk about from April 5th is when they really started planting the seeds about this mandatory vaccine. And I'll go into more depth about previous attempts to and the incrementation of how this has happened. But I'll just read out a little article that says that 86% of Australians want childhood vaccination to be compulsory. And this was by a Galaxy poll, which obviously it says an exclusive poll commissioned by the Sunday Telegraph has revealed overwhelming support. And then it goes on to talk about 86% of people. And as always, we'll leave links to all of these polls, all of this information at our website, AusRoundtable.com. But the interesting thing is the same exclusive poll the same outlet rather that ran this exclusive poll was the same one that started the No Jab, No Play campaign for New South Wales daycares, which is going to come up here. I spoke about it on the podcast a few weeks ago, and that was that the Sunday Telegraph and the Daily Telegraph, on their own, through a media outlet, started a campaign to say that we need to ban children from attending childcare centres if they're unvaccinated. That's regardless of whether you have conscientious objection forms to all of this stuff. And because of that, because the media did it, then all of a sudden the politicians, which are fixated on the media and all of these things, started introducing legislation to enforce that. And at the time I was saying this is the most outrageous form of media power that you can see. Murdoch-owned newspapers talking about, in opinion pieces, children should be banned from childcare centres if they're not vaccinated, and then it passed into law, and now that's law in New South Wales, and they're trying to bring it to Queensland. And now all of a sudden, they've just gone straight ahead with, now we want to make it mandatory, or you're not going to get family tax benefits. And this was the same thing. This is a representation. I was speaking to John off air about this, about how the agenda always gets through no matter of who is the false party paradigm that is in, whether it's Labor or Liberal, left or right, it's all controlled. Because if you go to tottnews.com, we reported back when Abbott was facing Kevin Rudd at the election to be elected, Kevin Rudd was vouching that he would scrap family tax aid benefits for people that don't have vaccinated children if he got re-elected. And now at the time, the Abbott government in the parliament were were saying that this needs more discussion, it's outrageous, all of these things acting as that they're an opposing party to the circus that we see. And so the Abbott government got in, and that didn't happen. We all breathed a sigh of relief. But now the same government, Abbott government, that said that they don't want this, are now pushing it in, and it just is it's a manifestation, Jono, of just how the agenda always gets through no matter who is in power, and there's no better example than this.
Yeah, and it happens every time on just about every issue, and that's why we say that the two-party paradigm is a false paradigm, and most of our listeners are aware of that. And I think over time, more and more people out there are slowly waking up to this fact that it's a false two-party paradigm system. The question is, they're going to wake up to that in time to stop the final plan that they've got for us, which is, of course, controlling us all as part of the same group that controls just about every other country on the planet. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, thanks for that. Look, I'd like to disagree with you. It's not just a two-party paradigm. There was an article in the Courier Mail this week on the 10th of April, and it's a three-party paradigm, and it may be even more than that. This one was fatal shot off target. Greens delete stupid anti-vaccination message. And I'll quote, the Greens have been forced to denounce a regional branch after it suggested vaccinations, not life-threatening diseases, were killing children. A Facebook post attributed to the Greens in Townsville was quickly taken down from the site yesterday after it sparked outrage of all things, by claiming vital vaccines were putting children's lives at risk. Not quote, and the quote from the Greens website was, not one person died of mumps, measles or rubella in the USA last year, but over 100 kids are said to have died as a result of vaccination. Now, apparently the central office of the Greens went off their head, and here we've got honest members of a local branch who saying what they believe get countermanded from head office. Now, one would assume that the head office got countermanded from Wall Street or somebody like that. So they're all being pulled into line. It's not just a two-party. It doesn't matter who we put in. They're all being controlled. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Lindsay. And hopefully, now that this is really starting, they're really going for broke here with just the speed that they're trying to implement all of this. And we've seen in the US that this has been building since the start of the year, and prior to that, that they want to arrest anti-vaccine campaigners and jail all these sort of people that are objective to a state policy. And if you go to youtube.com/TOTT News, my YouTube channel, I did an impromptu sort of video speaking about last year about how whether you're for or against vaccines, this is not the case. The main objective here is that we need to retain free choice, and we need to have the right to refuse a state-enforced policy. Because if you can't even choose what you do with your children, or you're going to be refused benefits from the government that you need in an economy and a design system that they've imploded, so that you need that, so you're relying on them. If you can't choose what to do with your own children, then what precedent does that set? Where can the government go from there? If they can't even if you can't do what you want with your children, and the government can tell you have to do this or nothing, then where does that go from there? And it's very concerning. So hopefully I can, I will have a feature piece. I've said I'm going to have it, but now it's really go time to actually have a proper feature piece. Hopefully we can get some of our listeners on, some of our people, like the reinvented Enchanted Warrior, that has been posting a lot about vaccines and vaccination that I've seen, and we can have a collaborative effort to really make a segment that we can cut out and upload on its own that can try and get some traction and try and get spread amongst this community to try and alert people that if you're for vaccines, good on you. If you're against vaccines, good on you. If you want to convince the other one, give them flyers, give them educational things, try and convince them. But when it gets to a point, Jono, where the state can tell you what to do, that's always a bad thing.
Yeah, and when you speak about a collaborative effort, I think that's very important, because now that they've said this, I think their plan is to introduce this as of January 1 next year. So that gives us, the people who I call the common sense people, about 7 or 8 months now to rally together. And I think there's a lot of people out there who normally wouldn't listen to conspiracy theories or to alternative theories about certain events, but they know for a fact, because they've done their research, that vaccines aren't what we told that they are. And so when they realize that they're being persecuted, they might be more open-minded to listen to people like us who have that same view about many issues, not just vaccines, if that makes sense. So I could almost see this being sort of a strategic advantage to us if we take advantage of it. And I would encourage all of our listeners who've done their own research on vaccines and who realize that they're not what we're told that they are, use that as an in when talking with people. There are a lot of people who are against forced vaccinations, even if they don't care about all the other stuff. this might be a way to get them to care, to realise the government and the media work together, and they do that for a certain purpose, and that purpose isn't your benefit, it's for theirs. And what is that purpose? Well, on that note, I'll read out a few comments from the live chat. We've got about 50 people watching live, so thank you for tuning in. Reclaiming the Butterfly says, I know nothing of Australian politics, lol, and I think Reclaiming the Butterfly is a new listener, and we have a lot of listeners, Ethan, from around the world. And one of the things that we try and do with this show, we spend about half the show talking about domestic things and about half talking international. Of course, when you realise that we're all in this together, Australia, Great Britain, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, many parts of Europe, we're all in this together with the Five Eyes, the Six Eyes, call us whatever you want to call us. There's the same agenda for people in all of these countries. So even though some of the domestic stuff might be somewhat tedious for international listeners, you have to understand if this isn't happening to you yet, it will, and vice versa. So I pay attention to what's happening in Canada, in America, and New Zealand, and I would put to you guys that you should also take interest in what's happening here, which is why we do the show the way that we do. Digivox23 says, greetings from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So another international listener. And Greg Williams says, all this vaccine stuff is to kill off Whitey. And hey, that's a very controversial position, but the more you look into this, Ethan, maybe it's not so far off the mark. Lindsay, I want to give you your final thought, then we'll throw to Ethan on this topic, then we've got to move on. So final thoughts on vaccinations for today.
Yeah. I agree with Ethan, and I know that there's a lady I was speaking to recently who's involved with one of these vaccination groups. Maybe I can give her another ring and see whether she'd be interested in getting into it as well. The other thing too is I'm probably going to ring my local member, who's a Liberal Party member, and just give them a real serve on Monday morning. I don't know what else to do, but and if necessary, I will go out and I will letterbox come up the next election to try and get rid of.
I'll tell you what, make sure, sorry to interrupt you there, make sure that when you do decide to call them and give them a bit of your mind, make sure you record it, and we'll make that a special feature for any subscribers to the ARP on our Podbean account, which we will be launching soon, of course. Make that one of the special features. You sign up and you get to listen to Lindsay give you know what, there's 220 some politicians in Canberra right now. I think that if we put aside a couple of days, we could call every single one of their offices and just do it over and over again.
Just make it a weekly thing for subscribers.
I'd pay money for that. Ethan, final thoughts on vaccinations for today?
Just to encourage everyone, if you have done your own research and you have information you want to send through, send to our Gmail account, AustralianRoundtable@gmail.com, or leave a comment at AusRoundtable.com. Send us all the information through that we can get. Within the next week or two, I'm really going to put together a comprehensive feature piece, because you're right, Jono, I think this is a hot issue, and I think a lot of people, especially people that I've spoken to, when they get past the emotional connection that they have to this, that's been planted in their subconscious about the children and whatnot, when they actually get to a point where you say, but look at the bigger agenda here. Do you want the government telling you what to do with your own children? Because this will set a precedent. Everyone goes, well, yeah, no. Most people that I've spoken to had the same reaction. And I think there's a lot of open-minded Australians out there that when Tony Abbott gets on in the newspaper and on the TV at press conferences, as Lindsay said, and talks about how he has daughters and how he cares for the children of Australia, I think a lot of people see through that. So final thoughts are, stay tuned for that, but we'll probably have more to speak about it for future updates. But if you do have any information for us, send it through, and we'll be able to utilise that and really make a go at it, John.
Terrific stuff. Well, Reclaiming the Butterfly in the live chat says they're from Brazil. So there you go. We're starting to get traction even in South America. And, I mean, if you look into some of the things that are happening there, that have happened there, they've been victims just as much as we are, and we're all in this together. I mean, that's one of the things. The more research you do, the more you realise it's a control grid that has more tentacles than you think. We've got to move on to the second topic for today. It's actually related, and it has to do with media ownership law reforms. I read an article from The Age, that's the Fairfax publication down there in Melbourne. This one's entitled, Abbott to Meet TV Executives Over Changes to Media Ownership, April 12, 2015. Quote, Prime Minister Tony Abbott will meet privately with the heads of the commercial television networks this week as he considers sweeping changes to media ownership laws likely to trigger a round of major mergers. Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull, currently overseas, is not expected to attend the meetings. Mr. Turnbull has argued that the current media ownership laws are outdated in the internet age and need to be updated. He has recommended to Mr. Abbott that the government scrap the reach rule preventing TV networks from broadcasting to more than 75% of the population, and the 2 out of 3 rule preventing media companies from owning a TV station, radio network and newspaper in the same market. Removing the 2 out of 3 rule would make mergers such as Nine Entertainment Co and Fairfax Media possible, with any further consolidation in the media industry likely to lead to significant job losses, end quote. So basically, for our international listeners who might not be aware, in Australia we've got 3 commercial broadcasters, 7, 9 and 10, and in each major city we've got 5 major cities. 3 of them have 1 newspaper, News Corp. 2 of them have 2 newspapers, a News Corp one and a Fairfax one. So we've got something between a monopoly and a duopoly in newspapers. We've got 3 television stations, and then a lot of the radio stations are owned by the same people who own the newspapers or the TV stations. So what do you think is going to happen when you remove these very weak laws to begin with? What do you think is going to happen when you remove them? You're going to end up with even further media consolidation. Of course, as many of our listeners are aware, the difference between the government and the media isn't as great as they want you to think.
Yeah, you're completely right, Jono. It's very concerning for me, for someone that had tried to make a go of being in the journalism industry, had hopes and dreams as a young person to do what I love, which was writing and to do news on a mainstream level like that, because I had faith before I actually learnt about the controlled monopoly and duopolies that we do have in this country. And it's concerning for me because I keep relating it to 1984, and I've always pictured that there's going to be a centralized control of news. That they're going to use this the same way that they're forming the one world government with the New World Order, with the European Union trying to destroy the borders of Mexico and Canada for a North American Union, Asia Pacific region and whatnot, trying to merge them together. I think that this, as we've incrementally gone over time, how it's gone to 2 and now it's going to go to 3. With that much control, it just seems like we're going to have a behind-the-scenes sort of control where everything's flowed through that, and that the couple of good radio stations and whatnot that we do have left could be in danger by this because of if these sort of companies like Murdoch can get in and influence their money and influence their agendas, it could drive out some of the independents, it could drive out some of the community radio stations and television stations, and then we're left with just this giant corporation. I've always seen that, and I've seen that this is very concerning to me, this article.
Yeah, Lindsay, I want to throw to you there just quickly. I've got more to add to this, but did you hear about this? Because when they say that they're thinking about watering down the laws, that just means it's going to happen. So it's going to give you a bit of forewarning so you get used to it, then we'll announce it. Lindsay, you've been around longer than us, and when you were my age, for instance, the laws were much tighter than they are now, and we did have a bit more media diversity, if I can use that word, at the time. You've seen the media landscape become more and more concentrated over your time. What are your thoughts about all of this?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts. I think you'll find that AAP and a few of these other major news gatherers filter everything anyway. Nearly everything coming to us, if you watch television at night, nearly every channel has the same story that they've got from one of these centralized filters. That's the first thing. The second thing, I read the book The Octopus, and I've talked about it in previous episodes. I recommend everybody read The Octopus, and perhaps we can put it on the website again. This was pretty much summed up back in 1940. It was almost all control back then. It's only gotten worse now. Now, the third point I'd like to make, I'll be very quick. During the week, 4BC lost a lot of their local people who had talkback shows, and etc. in Brisbane, and it was all going to be centralised from Sydney now. So if that this week alone, we've seen an example of how it's being centralised, so that the local people here won't be able to ring up their local talkback show and complain about things that have happened in Brisbane. It'll all be coming from Ray Hadley or somebody like that in Sydney, and we're seeing it in front of us every day of the week. So it's not a surprise that they're just formalising what they've already done. Okay, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, and let me give you an example of that with this power of the consolidated media. I was doing some background research into these new legislations to do with the vaccinations this morning, and what I found was the Courier Mail, which is Brisbane's our 3rd largest city, that's where we are right now, and Melbourne is our 2nd largest city. Their 2 leading newspapers are the Courier Mail and Herald Sun, respectively, both owned by News Corp. Now, I read the leading article on both of their websites. This vaccination thing was their leading article, and they were almost identical, just like you said there, Lindsay, including things like shocking revelations that 30,000 children still aren't vaccinated, stuff like this, like verbatim the same propaganda from paper to paper. And once you understand the power of the media to influence the minds, the media won't influence all people's minds, and they know that, and we know that. The issue is how they can influence the masses, the majority of the masses, dictate what's going to be discussed on that particular day, that particular week, that particular news cycle. Once you understand the power that they have for what is essentially mind control, you can see the issues of giving one small group of people so much power over the media. And it got me to thinking about the United States, which I've been meaning to talk about this for a little while. Just quickly, I want to go through the consolidation of the media in the United States. And that's a country that's, 10, 15 times the size of Australia by population. They've got what they call the Big Six media groups who control almost all the mainstream media, including films. Let me give you a brief rundown of who we're talking about. Number one, Comcast, 2011 revenues of $56 billion. They control NBC, CNBC, MSNBC, Universal Studios. Number two, Walt Disney, $40 billion. This is all 2011 revenues. They control ABC, ESPN, History Channel, Miramax Pictures, Touchstone Pictures. Number three, News Corp, $33 billion revenues. They control Fox, The Wall Street Journal, New York Post, National Geographic, book publisher HarperCollins, even the National Rugby League in Australia, and of course 20th Century Fox. Number four, Time Warner, $29 billion. They control CNN, the Cartoon Network, Time Inc., which includes People, Sports Illustrated, and of course the entire Warner Brothers outfit. Number five, Viacom, $15 billion. MTV, VH1, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, Paramount Pictures, and CBS, $14 billion. The CBS outfit, Showtime Network, Simon & Schuster Publishing, etc. Now, those are just a few of the holdings of each of these companies. They're the six, they're the big six. And all of those figures are from freepress.net. I'll link to them on AusRoundtable.com. Here's where it gets more interesting, and this is why I wanted to bring this up. Number five, Viacom, and number six on that list, CBS. They're both controlled by Sumner Redstone, who was born Rothstein, is Jewish. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with being Jewish, but when you look into these other magnates involved, you quickly see a pattern. So let's go through that list again. Number one is Comcast. The chairman and CEO is Brian L. Roberts, who's Jewish. The executive VP is David L. Cohen, who's Jewish. Number two, Walt Disney. Chairman and CEO is Bob Iger, is Jewish. Number four on the list was Time Warner. Chairman and CEO is Jeff Bezos. He's not Jewish, but his wife is. Number five and six are controlled by Redstone, who's Jewish. So, the third largest of the big six is a News Corp, and although Rupert Murdoch is not listed as Jewish, he's perhaps the biggest Zionist of the lot. And that's the really important issue that I want to get to here. You think about that. The big six in America who control almost everything that people hear, see, or read in the United States are all either run by Jews or by ultra-Zionists. Those are the facts. You look at what we get given here in Australia last year during Operation Protective Edge. Even though the Israeli Defense Force slaughtered 2,000 innocent civilians, Palestinians, we were told it was the Jews who were under rocket attack. That's what happened on our TVs. So even though our media might not be necessarily as controlled by the same entities as they are in the United States, they might not be, they might be. I mean, Rupert Murdoch controls a lot here. The point is we're copying the same Zionist nonsense, and it fills people's minds, and people believe this stuff. And with all of that said, Lindsay, I want to throw to you.
Yeah. Well, we've discussed this before, and I think you said the only thing was you hadn't had a chance to check it. But I remember being told a long time ago that Rupert Murdoch's mother was green and she was a Jewess. So that, according to the law of return to Israel, that makes him a Jew. You know, it doesn't matter how we get around that. So yes, of course he's a Zionist. Anyway, I won't go. I'll refer back to the octopus again. If anybody's in any doubt at all, go and read the octopus. This was all covered back in 1940. They had control of it then. It's only gotten worse. And so we've got to expect this. Okay, I'll throw back to you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Lindsay. It's troubling when you look at this and the control that we are subjected to, and that's why, Jono, you're speaking about that. And any company, well, for example, what I was trying to get to the point is a newspaper was forced to apologise for depicting a cartoon which was depicted from an actual event that happened. Where they were watching on the chairs, the Israelis watching Palestine from the chairs, and that was a company that had somewhat of a loose affiliation, you know, Fairfax controlled, but still, Fairfax sort of is, you know, in a different light than that. They still have good journalists. They report on national security fantastically. Philip Dorling and all these other journalists are real journalists. And when they try and depict some of these things, they get squashed by these massive companies that you were talking about, Jono, here in Australia and abroad. So I thought I'd just mention that and then throw it back to you.
Well, we've got a lot of new listeners since episode 16, so it is worth plugging that episode again. If you go to AusRoundtable.com, again, there's no ads there, there's no pop-ups, it's just our information that we provide for free. Episode 16, we went into great detail about some of the people who have been persecuted in this country for their views, whether it be about certain aspects of World War II history all their views on the religion of Judaism. And of course, The Age down there in Melbourne, controlled by Fairfax, as you said, they published a cartoon on their editorial page which depicted a photo of what actually happened with Jewish people celebrating the slaughtering of Palestinians. It was just a cartoon depiction of a real photo, forced to apologise. The editorial team was sent to re-education camps. I mean, this is all legit. It sounds crazy, but it's all there. We provide all the links on AusRoundtable.com for you to check, and we've been into great detail about that on episode 16, Ethan, like you said. So when we look at the media control and who's really running the show, it's pretty obvious what's going on. And I thought it was worth mentioning that. I'm going to spend more time looking into the media control in Australia over the next few weeks. I do want to say, though, that the research that I've been doing for my documentary about the Sydney siege hoax, you know what else was announced on the day of the Sydney siege? We know that on the day of the Sydney siege, they released their MyEFO, where we went from $30 billion deficit to $40 billion. We know that. We know that on the same day as the Sydney siege, Craig Thompson, the guy who could have brought down the government under Gillard, most of his charges were dropped, and he ended up only having to plead guilty to something like $5,000 worth of fraud charges from the hundreds of thousands that we were told about. We know that down in Melbourne, their East-West link, this massive engineering project that was going to cost the taxpayers billions, we know the business case for that was released on the day of the Sydney siege by amazing coincidence. But one thing that I haven't mentioned so much is the fact that the federal government, the Abbott federal government, also agreed to spend upwards of $10 billion buying assets back from Telstra. Now, of course, Telstra are involved in the whole communication industry as well. They're part owners of Foxtel and what have you. So you see the tentacles run deep. And on the day of the Sydney siege, all of these announcements were made just at the same time that everyone's attention was focused on something else. And I promise I will spend more time on that in the future. But we've got to press on, so we'll move on to the third topic for domestic, and that is to do with more Reclaim Australia rallies have been announced. Lindsay, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, the headline, that was the headline actually, more Reclaim rallies in the pipeline, and that was on the 7th of April in the Courier Mail. And I'll quote, "The announcement of new rallies comes after a high-profile Sydney criminal lawyer promised to defend anyone from the Reclaim rally who were charged by police. Australian Jewish Communal Lobby spokesman Daniel Hackham on Sunday posted on the lobby's Facebook page an offer of free legal advice," end of quote. Now, my difficulty with this is, who is this lobby offering to defend? Is it just another example of the old Jewish practice of entering both sides of every conflict, and especially penetrate every nationalist organisation at the start? Often they just take control of finance as a treasurer or a trustee, and then they tie up all the monies into the future so that these organisations just fall over. They virtually cut their legs off. And that's what's worrying me about this. Or are they offering everybody, both sides of that conflict, that they will defend them in court? I'm not sure about that. It wasn't in the article, but I just thought I'd throw that open to you fellas.
Yeah, I saw that one, Lindsay. What you're talking about is, for the listeners who aren't aware, there were rallies held Saturday last week, so about 8 days ago. It was called the Reclaim Australia rallies, and they did get a little bit of mainstream media attention. Basically, an ad hoc mixture of anti-Islamic people, anti-Sharia law people, just nationalist people, people who are conservative and don't like how quickly this country is being flooded with immigrants. A whole bunch of people. Of course, most of the mainstream media derided them as being racist or neo-Nazis, as they basically deride any nationalist these days. And what you're talking about there, Lindsay, is that there was it was reported in the mainstream press that a Jewish communal lobby, I think they called themselves that, the Australian Jewish Communal Lobby, had offered to pay the legal fees of any people involved in the Reclaim Australia rallies. And I first heard about this on I peruse many websites, as you can imagine, and one person I follow is what you might call a white nationalist, and he was reporting on this, but I thought, this doesn't sound legitimate. Where'd you hear this? But then it was reported in the News Corp press. I did try and look into that Jewish Communal Lobby. I couldn't find any real information about them. I didn't spend that much time there, Lindsay, but they might be legitimate. They might not be. They might be a hoax organisation, but it was reported in the mainstream press. Ethan, did you notice this?
This is the first I've heard about it, but immediately when I've heard about representing both sides, it's just talking about this could be a minuscule example of what companies like Halliburton and whatnot do after wars: fund both sides of the war and then clean up after the war. If this company or these lawyers or whatnot, these representations, if they're some sort of an alliance, not saying that we were, because I haven't done the research, but if that was the case, you can see again how the tentacles run deep, because what better way than to divide the people amongst each other and then represent them all and get the legal fees? You know what I mean? It's troubling when you could think of that as an option, but it could be the case. But I haven't looked into it. Again, I just I tried to avoid as much as I could about those rallies because I was at the Brisbane rally and there was just mayhem and calamity, and it was a terrible sight to see because both sides were completely programmed to believe a range of different thoughts. And I just wanted to avoid as much as that, but it's an interesting topic to talk
Well, in the live chat, we're up to 55 people watching live, and they're talking about some of Planetary Mirror's work. He's in the live chat as well. And Rorschach says, Je suis Copenhagen is amazing. Bear in mind, we'll be talking more about the Charlie Hebdo hoax later in the show. But getting back to this topic that we're discussing now, the Reclaim Australia rallies, this is something I've spent a lot of time looking at, the mainstream media coverage of it, and I do think this could be, just perhaps, I'm just speculating here, Lindsay, I want your opinion, this whole Reclaim Australia thing could be the 2000 teens version of the 1990s One Nation movement. I think this might be an opportunity for those who understand the way that we're pitted against each other to break through that false paradigm and get people to see that we're all on the same side. And it's probably up to people like us and our listeners to do that, because the people on either side of those Reclaim Australia rallies and the counter rallies, they're useful idiots for both sides. They're essentially being taught, trained, and encouraged the Reclaim Australia people to focus on the Sharia law as if that's our problem right now. The counter-protesters are being told to focus on the so-called neo-Nazis as if that's our problem right now. They're both being completely misdirected in a classic divide and conquer operation. We can see it, hopefully our listeners can see it, and over the next few weeks and months as this Reclaim Australia movement starts to gather steam, hopefully some of the wiser people can help steer it in wise directions. But we do want to press on to the next topic, Lindsay, and the fourth one for today is a Senate inquiry into tax avoidance. Now, I've got a lengthy article to read out here, so bear with me. Last week, I put together a piece on tax avoidance by multinational corporations operating here in Australia. Now, the mainstream media has been paying some attention to the tens of billions of dollars moved offshore every year for tax avoidance. And I mentioned that there was a Senate inquiry scheduled to look at these matters. Now, that inquiry took place during the week. I want to give you an update on that. This is from the Coolum News. BHP refuses to answer Senate committee tax questions, April 11, 2015. Quote, an inquiry into tax avoidance turned fiery when BHP Billiton financial staff refused to answer questions from senators about unpaid taxes. Mining companies funneling revenues overseas to pay lower taxes was under the spotlight on Friday as part of the Senate Economics References Committee public hearing. It was revealed that the Australian Tax Office, the ATO, had audited BHP Billiton, but staff would not answer specifics. Greens Senator Christine Milne asked whether BHP Billiton had received a paper from the tax office listing how much the company owed in taxes. But the company's head of group tax, Jane Mishi, refused to answer, saying it was an ongoing process and these things took time. Ms. Milne asked again if they had been issued with a paper from the tax office and for the dollar amount it stated, and Ms. Mishi replied, we'd prefer not to answer that question, thank you. But Chair Sam Dastyari told the BHP staff, you are testifying before a Senate committee, this is serious. BHP's Corporate Affairs President, Tony Cudmore, asked for them to be exempt from answering the question under public interest immunity grounds, but the committee dismissed this. BHP can now either return to the committee with an answer, which they can ask to remain confidential at the discretion of the committee, or continue to refuse. A refusal would refer the matter to the Senate. Earlier in the session, Rio Tinto and BHP Billiton admitted they had operations, including marketing hubs, in Singapore. BHP Billiton was asked how much profit the Singapore business has made and how much tax it paid in the country. But Mr. Cudmore said this was commercially sensitive information. Rio Tinto's Australian manager, director Phil Edmonds, said the company's Singapore operation had earned $719 million last financial year, and then it paid $44 million in tax. He said their tax rate was 5% in Singapore. Mrs. Xenophon asked the BHP representatives why they were not willing to cooperate, claiming there was competitively sensitive information when their competitors, Rio Tinto, were open. Doesn't that make a mockery out of your arguments, he asked. I can't speak for Rio, Mr. Cudmore replied, end quote. Now, that's just a portion of the article. We'll link to that on roundtable.com as always. Basically, we've got the people here put before a Senate committee to ask, is your business funneling money offshore to avoid paying Australian taxes? And they're saying, we're not going to answer.
Yep.
And what are you going to do about it? Now, another point that I took from this is fancy Sam Dastyari talking about being serious in the Senate. Back in November 2014 on episode 5 of the Australian Roundtable podcast, I read out a verbatim quote from Hansard of Dastyari in the Senate when he was supposed to be debating a bill about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where he spent his time joking about an appearance on Dancing with the Stars. Okay, you can go back to episode 5 on roundtable.com and check that for yourself. So what have we got? We've got the leaders, the financial leaders or the managing directors of these large multinational mining corps going to a Senate inquiry being asked, how are you avoiding the tax in this country? What are you doing? they're saying we're not going to answer the questions, and the man telling them to take them seriously is the same man who talks about Dancing with the Stars when he's in the Senate. It's a joke of a system, Lindsay, and you can see that yourself.
Yeah, I agree with you. My first reaction was the Senate is the highest court, or the Parliament is the highest court in the land. Now, if an ordinary court can put these blokes in jail, I can't see why the Senate can't summons these people, the boards of that company, the board members before them, and put them in jail if they won't answer. What are we playing here? I know they think they run the place, but don't let them, it's an embarrassment in front of the rest of the world to allow these people just to do whatever they damn well like in this country. If you got any status at all as a parliament, bring them in and stand over them and make them do what they want, what you want. That's my view of it. Now, I've got some other comments on this topic, but I'll throw that back to you first.
Yeah, you're right, Lindsay. And for me, it's seeing it's seeing how the tentacles once again go into Parliament, because we know that a lot, not just in Australia but in the United States, a lot of campaigns and whatnot are funded by some of these multinational corporations. And we're supposed to have a Senate, and we're supposed to have a House of Representatives and a Senate that to account for these multinational corporations and make them do, as you said, Lindsay, but yet how can you regulate a corporation when you're funded by the same corporation and the same corporate interest, and your party is funded by these same people that own these same groups and lobbyists that own these corporations? So it's a tough thing to get around, because absolutely, if you were right, if we were in a perfect world, of course the Parliament, the highest court of the land, could prosecute them and say no, no, you're going to do this, etc., etc. But it's the same with the central banks, the privately owned central banks that dictate all of our money. The government answers to these central banks. These banks, the big four banks, they're too big to fail. They don't want them to fail. That's why they have bail-ins and bailouts and all of this nonsense. So you see how the tentacles really run deep once again, and it's just unbelievable stuff, John.
Certainly is, and it makes a nice little segue into our next topic. Topic 5 for today, Lindsay, is yours. It has to do with not banking on action being taken to the High Court. I'll throw to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. This one, it was in the Courier Mail on the 9th of April. Don't bank on action reaching the High Court. And the quote, getting a class action against ANZ, which is the Australian New Zealand Banking Company or Corporation, or over unfair bank fees into the High Court is not a done deal, say industry insiders. After the federal court overturned a previous ruling against the bank, in the judgment yesterday, Chief Justice James Alsop said, quote, there was no dishonesty, there was no trickery or sharp practice, end of quote, on ANZ's part. Now, firstly, time does not allow me to address a claim made about the previous Chief Justice of the Queensland by an ex-bank manager, wherein he claims that a certain bank never loses a case heard before that justice. Now, I might have to do some preparation on that and bring it in to show you, because what this bank manager was suggesting was this bloke was crook. But what I will come back to is that this could be a sign of what possibly happened in the federal court as well. And somebody might even own the federal court. Now, I've got to be careful saying that, but there are precedents for this sort of thing. Everything about, and this is what I like to disagree with this Justice Alsop, everything about the banks is dishonest and sharp practice. Usury is considered a capital crime in the Old Testament, and usurers were not even allowed to be buried in the same cemetery as Christians in Britain around the period of 1000 AD. If we all refused to set foot into a bank, they would die on the vine. This is without the fact that they are not loaning anything to us to begin with. So we're going on about usury, but they don't even loan us anything to charge us usury on. We create the money with our promissory note, and they usually securitize it. So what I'm suggesting to people is, instead of going on with this and getting upset about the banks and how the courts favour them and what have you, is just let's help our own children and grandchildren to buy their own homes. And after a couple of generations, we would all as families share the billions that the banks currently extort out of the mortgage racket every year. So I think it really comes back to us. Just bypass this whole stinking, rotten, corrupt system, courts, banks, the whole lot of them, and start building a parallel society where we look after ourselves, our families, and our neighbours. Okay, I'll throw that back to you.
Yeah, you make a few terrific points there, Lindsay, and one of them is this idea that usury is evil. I say it all the time, and tying into what Silver Slave 333 says in the live chat, he says, well, back then, money wasn't paper, it was a silver coinage. So even when back then usury was lending something real and expecting the real plus a bit more back in return, even back then it was considered wrong. The system that we have today is even worse because they're not even lending us something real. It's all make-believe. And then they expect us to pay them back that make-believe thing with more make-believe, which we can only get through our labour. So it is literally slavery. People see the TV, and on the TV, slaves are shown having whips and chains. We think, oh, that's a slave. As long as I don't have chains on my feet and I'm not being whipped, I'm not a slave. Because that's their perception of what a slave is. But if you think about what slavery really is, someone being in control of you, that's what we have today with this utterly corrupt, evil system. Usury is slavery. The usury today is the worst form because they're not even lending us something real. They're making up, lending it to us, and we have to pay it back.
You're right, Jono. There's, as I said, there's two forms of prisons. There's prisons where you can see the bars and touch them, and prisons where you can't see the bars around you and you think you're free. And to just for our Australian listeners, just to expand on ANZ Bank as a whole, I wrote an article at tottnews.com from an Oxfam report called Banking on Shaky Grounds that I found, where it talks about how these big four banks are using your money that you're putting in the banks and your fees to extort third world countries in the agricultural commodities industry to an excess of $20 billion. Now, this included the NAB, the Commonwealth Bank, and Westpac, but ANZ in Cambodia is financing a sugar plantation that has involved child labour, military-backed land grabs, forced evictions, and food shortages. And ANZ Bank are funding some of these criminal, corrupt elements in Cambodia, and this was from an Oxfam report. So I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. But it just goes reinforcing what Lindsay said, is we need to bypass this whole system and build a parallel one on our own, because it's not legitimate in the first place. It's only that we have the perception that it's legitimate, that the masses have the perception that we go to work for pieces of paper which are debt and money and slavery. We're enslaved, and then they take the fees that they get off us to enslave other third world nations. And if we don't bypass it, the power is in our hands, is the point I'm trying to make. It's a house of cards, and if we just moved out from underneath of it, it would topple to the ground, Jono.
Yeah, if enough people worked out what was really going on and worked together to combat it, it would actually be very easy to overcome. The issue that we've got right now, and this isn't just to do with money, but it's to do with just about all of this structure that we have, is it's all to do with psychological operations. I mean, if you look at organizations, let me say it again, if you look at organizations like the CIA, a lot of their work isn't put into kidnapping people or into assassinating people. That's a small aspect of it. Most of it is to do with psychological operations, controlling the minds of the masses. If you can get the masses to want their own slavery, it's much easier to have them as slaves than to force them into slavery for a couple of reasons. One, people will always work harder when they think they're free. So you make them think they're free, convince them that they're free, enslave them, but make them think that they're free through your psychological operations, convince them that there's some other form of slavery, North Korea or whatever, make them believe that in North Korea things are really terrible. And most people believe that. Even all of our listeners probably believe that in North Korea things are really bad. But my question to you is why? Why do you believe that? You see it on TV, your government tells you, oh, we're not like North Korea. How do you know what North Korea is like? You've got no idea. They're just telling you there's this other place that's much worse, so you're free because you're not like that. It's all just media fakery. But the other aspect is that if they had to actually physically enslave us, they wouldn't have the human resources to do it. Because then all of a sudden, you would need someone with the whips, you would need someone putting chains on, you'd have to have someone to quash any uprisings. Whereas if they can convince us that what we've got isn't slavery, that we're free and that we're lucky and this is just the basic monetary system, if they can convince us to believe that, then their job is done. So as hard as it does seem, as tough as our situation seems, because everyone does believe in this bullshit system, as tough as it seems for us to break through, it wouldn't take many of us breaking through it to make a real change. And I think people have to keep that in mind. It's very easy to get despondent, but I think more and more people are starting to realize, hold on, this whole system is a sham. And I've got a number of comments from the live chat. Robo Spirit says the banks don't really have vaults full of gold. Well, in this country they don't. But, of course, in Iraq they've got banks full of $500 million of gold and cash on hand. Of course, for those who aren't aware, ISIS was alleged to have just found $400 million worth of gold and other things in the banks of Mosul. So I know our banks don't have real things, but the banks at ISIS raid, full of cash. Helen I'm telling in the live chat says, look at America panel. it's the same, and she's referring to the corrupt banks and the corrupt multinational corporations, and that's a point that we always make. It is the same all over the world, and if you do enough research, you'll realize it all goes back to one central point. They've got tentacles everywhere. And Gary McAntenna, so just going back to that Reclaim Australia topic, says he wants to know, how did they organise so quickly? How did they come about so quickly? I completely agree, Gary Mack, and I hope you're going to stick around for Sunday sessions later in the day, Gary Mack. We want you on the show, so make sure you stick around. Sunday sessions, 7 p.m. Lindsay, this is a very important topic. We do have to move on. Any final thoughts on this issue of money, usury, what have you, before we move on?
No, I haven't, but can I just make a point on that question about how do they organise so quickly? There was a Reclaim Australia group, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that were just an internet group. Now, whether this grew out of that, I don't know. But I think it was a Yahoo group or something at that time. So the seeds of this group now may well have come out of that previous group.
They may well have done. I've got to do more research into the background of the guy who's seen as like the figurehead of Reclaim, but it wouldn't surprise me one bit if this was controlled from the start. Of course, if it isn't controlled from the start, certain elements will try and get in there and control it as soon as they can. So we'll keep paying attention to that. Ethan, any final thoughts on money is usury is slavery?
No, I think we've summed it up. Just to encourage people again, just reiterate what you said. It doesn't take that many people to do it. It doesn't take that many people to do it. And if we can get a way that we can find a like-minded community, it always goes back to the community, John, and this is what the purpose of this show and other shows is to get a community, not just online, but in the physical themselves, get a community of like-minded thinkers together, and as a collaborative effort, we can think of a way to bypass this system and to build our own parallel system. And so I just encourage people to spread this idea of community. If you have information, send it through to us, and yeah.
Really well said. Well, we're coming towards the end of the domestic segment. We've got a couple of topics left, and number 6 for today is Queensland Police Anonymous Donations, Ethan.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. We spoke way back. It was a few months. I don't have the exact episode on me, but it was just a brief thing about Queensland Police, and they had sponsorship from Santos, which is our largest oil and gas company here in Australia, on the side of their cars. And we talked about the agendas of coal seam gas protesters and the coal seam gas industry and just the oil and gas industry in general, of how can the police, how can this not be a conflict of interest with police, speaking about how they have corporate sponsorships on the side of their cars. And if you head to the TOTT News YouTube channel, youtube.com/TOTT News, I cut out a snippet from that episode so you don't have to go looking for it. Speaking just specifically on that, it's called Conflict of Interest, private sponsorship of Queensland Police. And now there's been an update on that. And I'm just reading out an article from the ABC. It's entitled, Queensland Police Received $475,000 worth of private donations in the 2013-14 financial year, figures show. Queensland Police Commissioner Ian Stewart says he is standing by his decision not to release the name of private companies who have sponsored the police service. Mining companies, banks, media organisations and security firms are among a raft of sponsors behind the almost $500,000 in donations to the Queensland Police Service last financial year. The donations for this financial year are on track to reach the same level. The ABC first asked of a list of sponsors and sponsorship amounts 4 months ago after environmentalists alleged it was a conflict of interest. The Queensland Police Service executive have now provided 2 lists of donations and a brief description of the programs, but the names have been withheld. And it goes on to talk about activists talking about how this is a conflict of interest. Drew Harton from the Lock the Gate Alliance specifically about coal seam gas protesting. And it says it in the article there. Banks, media organisations, all of these big industry that are controlled by the same corporate interests are now flooding our police services that are supposed to be representatives of us, that are supposed to work for us, but as the old saying goes, the police used to watch over the people, now they're watching the people. And I think that this is just another terrible example of how the police can get $500 billion, in financial donations from private companies, and we don't even get the names. And Lindsay, I want to throw it to you just to talk about how can we be accountable for this? What do the police What do they have to do with these donations? Are they accountable for the funds? Do they have to pay anything like this? I just want to get your thoughts on this in general, and just the general idea of conflicts of interest within the police force.
Yeah, okay. I've been thinking about this during the week, and it's been a bit of a concern to me because I can remember in the past other people have inquired into the Queensland Police Service, and there are about 4 or 5 different ones registered in Australia. So we don't know which one is the real Queensland Police Service and which is the dodgy ones. So really, we don't know where this money's going. That's my first thing. Now, the second thing is we could probably take issue a warrant into the court asking them for their, I'm trying to think how to put it, where they get their authority. If they're a corporation and they're not part of the government of the Queen, which is where all these they're ministers of the Queen, so presumably they get their authority from the Queen. So where does this other corporation come from? Where does it get its authority? And there's so many questions here that need to be cleaned up. And I think it's not just to do with the police, but this is the one that's come to the fore. So we really don't know where that money's gone. We don't know which one which one named the Queensland Police Service is their corporation which they're working under, and which ones are for other purposes. This whole thing is so shonky, and it's about time we brought them into to boot. Now, it may be that the next time somebody goes to court, hint hint, they could issue a warrant to find out just where they get their authority from. That'd be my suggestions. So I'll throw that back to you, Jono.
Yeah, that's an interesting, avenue of inquiry to go down. Just where do they derive their authority? I think most people, though, if you speak to the average person on the streets, they just accept as a prima facie fact that the police are authorised legally, morally, whatever, to do what they do. I'd still be interested to ask those people, though, do you have an issue with the police being sponsored by private companies? And if they answer no, then you know you're dealing with a very brainwashed individual. And there's probably no hope for that person to ever come back. But I would like to think that even amongst the regular sleeping population, that many of them, if you said to them point blank, do you think it's okay that the police are going to be sponsored by private companies and we won't even get to know where the money's coming from exactly? What do you think about this? I would like to think that even many of them would take a step back and say, yeah, actually, that does sound concerning. I can see how there might be problems. And I think a lot of the time when we talk about these issues, Lindsay, is a lot of the time people don't have that ability, that natural instinct or inclination to think a few steps ahead. You put a question to them, they think just in the moment, is it directly going to affect me? No, then there's no problem. But if you can just think a few steps ahead, it's not hard to see how just a little bit further down the line, this could become a very big issue, Ethan.
I completely agree, and I think this is extremely troubling because, especially here in Queensland, from my observation and what I've wrote about, the Queensland Police Service, I always talk about how they should be under the anti-Vlad laws about, the vicious lawless disassociation, because they're the biggest gang of them all. They're the biggest thugs of them all. And Lindsay's right. There was a case in Western Australia talking about it's in frequently unanswered questions of the Australian government in quotation marks. Speaking about, he wanted to know where they got the authority, why the Australian government, Parliament of Australia, has a copyright symbol on the website. Where do you get your authority from? When he was talking about having to pay to get his car removed from the impound. And from that, he went on a journey because they couldn't prove that they weren't a corporation and that the Australian government is actually a corporation registered in the United States of America. And then Lindsay's right, here in Queensland with the police, there's several different things. There's different companies, there's different organisations, and it's only when you get to this that you really see the extent of just how far this goes. And back again to what you said before in the previous topic, Jono, about the mental programming about how everything's legitimate, everything just flows as normal. When you see it's the complete opposite of that, and nothing's legitimate, and there's a lot of questions to be asked, and I hope we can continue to explore those here in the show.
We certainly will, and we have touched on the corporate sponsorship of police in the past, and as it comes up, we'll keep updating on that, because do you think you're going to see anything negative about that on your mainstream media? No, you won't, for the reasons that we've already delved into on this show. The mainstream media isn't here to report on the government, it's here to report for the government, and once you get that through your mind, you'll see everything very differently. I like to think that most of our listeners have already made that paradigm shift, hopefully by speaking with friends and family, just here and there, planting seeds. Time takes a long time oftentimes, but just bit by bit, helping them to understand the media isn't their friends. The media is there to put out a message as they're dictated to. And it's not that Tony Abbott gets to tell the media what to say. the people who tell Tony Abbott what to say are the same ones telling the media what to say. It's that simple. We've got to move on to the final topic for domestic today, and that is topic 7. Coles fails the freshness test. Lindsay?
Yes, thank you for that. This was in the Courier Mail on the 11th of April, and the headline was Coles fails freshness. That was the title. And I'll quote, Coles has been ordered to pay $2.5 million penalty for falsely advertising, quote, freshly baked bread. The freshly baked, end of quote, bread. So that's what they were charged the penalty for. That had been partially baked off-site, sometimes months earlier, and they were promoting it as baked today, sold today, end of quote. Okay, so after my article last week about the Coles Group, you may or may not recall, and its Jewish ownership, is it any wonder that this has happened? I recommend listeners to read the book Riddle of the Jews' Success. I mentioned it last week, I'll mention it again, and you'll find there'll be a link for you there. It contains just such an act of misrepresenting inferior material in clothes as silk, and that was back in the 1800s. When caught out, they apologised, they refunded the money, but for every one that was returned for a refund, how many did they make a win on? That's my point. And it's the same with this, with the bread. The same situation applies here with Coles and the bread. They are fined $2.5 million, but they've sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of substandard product, and really this penalty is just like hitting them with a feather. That's how I view it. So we don't know how much profit they've made out of that. Now people will say, oh, it was just bread. No, I haven't bought any of this freshly baked bread, but I would guarantee that it's going to be a lot more costly than the stuff you buy that's been baked a day or 2 days old. So they were making extra profit because it was especially lined, and they lied about that. And now they've got the hide to come out and say, oh, we didn't do it intentionally. Bullshit. That's my... They know exactly what they don't do. If you're running Coles, do you really think that you do something unintentionally? Yeah. Anyway, all right, I'll throw that back to you now.
Yeah, it's a good point, Lindsay, and this was reported on in the mainstream press here in Australia to some degree, but we have to bear in mind that if you look through the tabloid newspapers in Australia, many of the advertisements are from the Coles Woolworths duopoly. Same thing on television, same thing with the radio, so it's not in our mainstream media's interest to say anything too negative about these companies because of the power they have, and just as we have a highly concentrated media, we also have a highly concentrated supermarket sector to the point where Coles and Woolworths control between them something like 90% of the grocery shopping done by Australians. That's off the top of my head, don't quote me on that one, but it's close to that amount. We've got a duopoly, and the amount of control that they have to the point where they can pass things off as being one thing when they're clearly not that thing. What do they cop? A couple $1 million fine? That's to put that in perspective, that's like someone here getting caught speeding, right? Deliberately speeding and saying, well, I didn't mean it, and getting given like a $2 fine for it. If you knew you could get away with it, you'd probably start doing it more often, wouldn't you? And that's exactly how the Coles and the Woolworths of the world see it. Ethan, what say you?
I completely agree with everything that's been said. Lindsay makes a good point. You think that they do it unintentionally? You think that this is an accidental, everything that happens, you think that it's by accident or it's by design, a cause and effect theory of history, as it's been put. I think we should name this episode How Far the Tentacles Go, because every topic we're saying, it relates to how much control these corporate interests have over this, the people that own Woolworths, the people that own Coles, going back the way that the media speaks to the government, the media is funding the police. It's unbelievable when you actually wrap your head around all of this, that everything is spread throughout it, and the only thing that tells you that this is right is the media, because things would be very different if it was, Jono.
Yeah, Silver Slave 333 in the live chat says, shop at local farmers markets, support the farmers. I agree 100%, and it is embarrassing for me to think that back when I first moved out of home and I was first responsible for doing my shopping, I did used to shop at Coles and Woolworths for almost everything, you know what I mean? I just didn't think twice about it, and these days I'm happy to say that I buy my vegetables from the local vegetable seller. It's not a farmer's market seller, there's not one local to me that I can get to and back from, but at least the local vegetable seller is independent from Coles Woolworths. I haven't even asked them to make sure, and they did tell me that they're independent from them. They could lie. I mean, they could be lying, but at least I'm trying. Same thing with the butcher. I buy my meat from the local butcher, and the guy who manages the joint says to me, yeah, the owner's independent. Again, I just have to take their word for it, but at least I'm trying, and if we all did that, we might be able to take away some of the power from this duopoly. And bear in mind that sometimes the best way that you can vote is with your feet, it's with your wallet. And we can complain about the duopolies and we can complain about the media concentration. Well, one thing that we can actually do to make a difference in a quantifiable way is to stop buying stuff from these companies. Stop buying your groceries from Woolworths. Stop buying your groceries from Coles. You can actually measure the amount of money that you're no longer giving them. And since you're slaving for that money, you're essentially slaving for them, or stop slaving for them. You're not forced to purchase from these stores, so stop purchasing from them. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And I don't know what I've got to be careful saying that because I sound like Ethan now. No, but it is true, and that was my point before when I was talking about the banks. It's the same thing. They've got this huge building that they've made out of our money, and people think it's legitimate. Well, no, we've seen banks fail in America. If we all stopped doing business with them, they would die, and they'd have to move out of those big buildings and go somewhere else to a smaller building, and they get to the point where they just shrivel up. And that's what we've got to do. It's a long-term thing, and we had some people last week on the show giving feedback saying, it's all very good talking about the bad things. What can we do? Well, that's one thing we can do, is we can determine where our money goes and don't give it to these people. Now, I know it's small, but if enough people did it, it would have an effect on them, and they would have to sit up and listen. Okay, that's about all I've got to say now.
Yeah, and I'll add to that as well. I think most of our listeners probably do already shop at local farmers markets or try and avoid the big duopoly. Planetary Mirror says that in California, the farmers market's even delivered to you, which would be fantastic. That might even be a facility that's available here. I'll have to look into that. So thanks for pointing that out. But this is a quantifiable thing we can do. If you are spending $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 on groceries every year, I mean, it depends on how big your family is, but you get what I'm saying. That's a certain amount of money that's going to go to someone. Would you rather go to someone who's independent, or do you want it to go to one of the big duopoly chains? I mean, the answer for that one should be obvious. And let me tell you this, once I realized that I was doing the wrong thing shopping at Coles and Woolworths, once I started changing my shopping habits, it took me a little while to get used to this new place, just having to walk a little bit further, whatever, but once I got used to it, I felt better for it. I feel better for knowing, or at least for believing, I mean, I have to take their word for it to an extent, but for at least believing that I'm buying from local independent groups rather than duopoly. I feel better for that. It's not that I sit there and I judge the people who shop at Coles. I used to be one of them. I didn't know any better. But once you do know better, it's something that'll make you feel better when you shop in a better way, which is to support the people who deserve your support, and Coles and Woolworths do not deserve your support. We've got to move on to the international topic now, and the first segment, and the first topic for the international segment, Ethan, is one that we've been waiting for a couple of weeks from you. We've had to sort of keep pushing it to the next week, because there's so much to talk about every week, but this week we're going to talk about it, Facebook controlling the news.
Thanks, Jono. Yeah, I thought this was an important one. I didn't want to cut it down a bit previous weeks because we had so much to talk about. So I've prepared a feature piece here, and it's to do with Facebook trying to internalize some of these larger news corporations so that people don't have to click to an external site to go to their news. It can all come up within the Facebook news feed, and it's very concerning. And I'll just read out what I've got prepared here. In recent months, Facebook has been quietly holding talks with at least half a dozen media companies about hosting their content inside Facebook rather than making users tap a link to go to an external site. The New York Times late media writer David Carr first reported on Facebook's ambitions to host news in October. He said that media companies would virtually be slaves, quote, in a kingdom that Facebook owns, end quote, and cited digital publishing executives who declined to be identified, saying, quote, all any of us are talking about is when the other shoe might drop, end quote. At the same time, Ryan Chittum of the Columbia Journalism Review believes that the news business should not accept Facebook's proposal because it is risky to establish their business models around Facebook, Google, and the like, all of these companies that we've spoke about that control it. Back in October, Carr wrote that Facebook was, quote, on something of a listening tour with publishers discussing better ways to collaborate, end quote. The social networking service offered to help publishers, quote, do a better job of servicing readers in news feeds, end quote, which included enhancing their approach to mobile. Facebook intends to start testing the new format in the coming several months, the New York Times recently reported, and the initial partners are expected to be BuzzFeed, National Geographic, and the New York Times, although discussions are ongoing, so others may join. The Times and Facebook are moving closer to a firm deal, sources reveal. Now, that was from the Australian Review, and I'll leave a link to that at ozroundtable.com, but I'll just continue on now. I will now refer to an article by the New York Times cited in the discussion entitled Facebook Memo Host Sites Content, something I came across which describes Facebook's plan in full. And let me say, I personally believe, although not evident at the time, that the implications of this are so large, I have far more questions than answers. Let's start with a few excerpts from the article. Quote, with 1.4 billion users, the social media site has become a vital source of traffic for publishers looking to reach an increasingly fragmented audience glued to smartphones. In recent months, Facebook has been quietly holding talks with at least half a dozen media companies about hosting their content inside of Facebook. Such a plan would represent a leap of faith for news organizations accustomed to keeping their readers within their own ecosystems, as well as accumulating valuable data on them. Facebook has been trying to allay their fears, according to several of the people briefed on the talks, who spoke on the conditions of anonymity because they were bound to non-disclosure agreements. And this is the important part, how they intend to go within the next several months. The article continues, and just as Facebook changes its news feeds to automatically play videos on the site, giving them an advantage compared to YouTube, it could change the field to give priority articles directly on the site. Now, what the article's trying to talk about here is that many Facebook users who are on Facebook know that there was an option that Facebook introduced on their new timeline where videos that come up on the newsfeed play automatically on mute, and if you want to view them, you click the unmute button, and there was a setting to turn it off. But the statistics have said, that I've looked up, the statistics have said that loading from Facebook sites takes a certain amount of variable time to load the site compared to a video playing through that. So if a news company like the New York Times, for example, internalizes their Facebook deals, which it says they're close to doing a deal, then that can give them priority of who gets to see their content because there's a faster click ratio. It's inside of Facebook. You don't have to go to another website. It doesn't use data for you to go to another website. All of these things that then would disadvantage the other news companies, making them sign up as well. Now, before I get into some of my problems and concerns with it, I'll just open up to a general discussion. And John, I'll get your thoughts first about this, about any thoughts that you want to speak about concerns about how if news companies sign on to this, information will remain inside of Facebook and there will be no external link to click to.
Well, I think it's pretty clear, it has been for a while, but now it's getting more clear what their ultimate goal is. Because I think what we have to do sometimes is put ourselves in their shoes. If their plan is for complete control of people's minds, what would you do? Well, what you would try and do is slowly but surely narrow down the number of outlets, not just people can go to, but that they'll want to get to. If you can get a platform going, some kind of mixture between Facebook and Skype and all these other things where someone can just log into that and they'll access all their information through that. If you can do that, get it to be something that some people want to sign up to. They want to sign up to Facebook and have everything involved there. They want to read the news through Facebook, whatever. Then you've got a terrific platform for controlling not just what these people think, but what they're exposed to, what they could even potentially think. And I think it's very obvious that's exactly what they're doing. And we're already getting towards that point. And of course, there was that incident a year or so ago where they even publicly announced that they were running psyops on their user base where they would modify the feeds that came up on people's Facebook feeds. They would take a couple different groups and give one group only positive updates from other people and see how that affected their behavior. And they give another group negative updates from their friends and family and see how that affects their behavior to see if your feeds only show positive things, how much does that change your behavior and vice versa, right? They even admit to doing psyops on their own customer base, and yet people still use Facebook like lemmings. Lindsay, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, I agree entirely. My main concern with this right from the word, I've nothing to do with Facebook. My main concern right from the word go was I remember reading an article, or a couple of articles, and they were suggesting that the fellow that started it was the grandson of the Rockefellers. And I thought that says it all. This is not some bright, smart young university student who started it off, and no, he's had millions and millions of dollars behind him to get this going, and it's for a purpose. That was my view of it. Now, other people might disagree with me, but that's how I start. So anything that we've been saying today about any of these groups that go back to the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds or what have you, this is just one more. You talk about tentacles of an octopus, this is just one more. Okay, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, you're completely right, Lindsay, and obviously most of our listeners probably know that Facebook was designed with a back door, that the CIA and all of these companies integrated a media base and a base to extract information from it, because when it first started, they had to apply for single warrants to get information about people. So they said, what better way than to just incorporate our database into yours so we can just get information on whoever we want. But I'll go through a few of the problems here with this, and it's talking about Facebook, about why they are in a position to do this and how people get most of their news from Facebook. Now, the first problem is we already know, as I've spoken about previously on this podcast, and as Jono mentioned, manipulation of the newsfeed, that when Facebook became a publicly traded enterprise, they developed an algorithm to control what users see in their news feeds to encourage page moderators to pay to increase what they define as reach. That is, the percentage of people that have liked the page who are able to see the posts you make. The problem with this is there is an overwhelming favorable bias leaning towards larger pages like the Courier Mail that appear in users' news feeds with their propaganda, even if the user hasn't liked the page. While smaller pages, when purchasing greater reach, are flooded with inactive accounts from other continents as new likers to show that the advertiser that it is indeed working. That is ultimately, in the end, the worst thing you could do, because now the audience is larger through fake and real accounts, and a smaller percentage of reach is now flooded with said fake accounts, narrowing the already minority of legitimate users who would have seen the content in the first place. Now, I'll go back to why this is important, but I want to quickly also mention that when I was training to become a journalist, I was involved in a number of invite-only Walkley media talks at the Queensland State Library, which are online to view, which I'll leave links to at AusRoundtable.com, and they examined the connection between social media and news website traffic. The panel concluded, although in an ignorant fashion as expected, that social media plays a vital part in news content because most of the people discover what is happening in the world through their news feeds as opposed to actually going to the websites directly. This is due to a, quote, trust circle mentality, where if a friend you consider legitimate and trustworthy shares a news article, yourself and the immediate circle around this individual also consider the content worthy of reading, etc., and the effect snowballs. So now that we understand how powerful Facebook is in terms of drawing readers to websites and the already proven methods of censorship the company practices, what will this mean if this draconian control of news expands and continues? It seems to me that Facebook has all the leverage in these negotiations with the content providers, with the benefits, etc. And if you're a news website that refuses to join the program, over time you might see your traffic evaporate compared to your competitors whose content will load seamlessly and be promoted by the Facebook algorithm. If a large percentage of your traffic is being generated by Facebook, can you really afford to lose this? And then what happens to us independent bloggers and journalists who are already crushed by this? So at the end of the day, Facebook has the leverage, Jono, in this negotiation. They are saying, here we are. The majority of your traffic comes from social media. People see what's happening in the news through social media. If you agree to put your news content inside of Facebook, it will load seamlessly. It will be better promoted in the Facebook algorithm because you're incorporated with us. And that will crush your competitors. They're either going to have to join or perish because people aren't going to click to an external link. They're not going to do all of this, and they're not going to show up on the Facebook algorithm. So this is just, I had to say this feature piece just because this is a very dangerous precedent where the control of all news is going to be censored through Facebook to a point where you're not even going to be able to see anything that comes up in your news feed that is even speaking about the government, and it's just going to be an Orwellian control grid. Jono, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you control the flow of information, you control the people's minds, and I guess this is just another extent. I mean, it's always been the way, since we've had mass media, it's been the way that those who control that media get to control what messages are put on, whether it's to do with political advertising or protest advertising or whatever. They've been able to say, no, we don't want that, it doesn't help our bottom line. I guess this goes another step further because a lot of people, they just trust what comes up in their news feeds. If they go to heraldsun.com.au online and check it out, they're just trusting that the most important information to them is being provided. With Facebook, they're going to tailor what information comes up, and what's more, many people will naturally trust the feeds that come up. It won't occur to them to go and look further. At least with TV, you can change the channel and kind of pretend like you're getting an alternate source of information. Even in Australia, we've still got the ABC and SBS, and they're completely controlled, but at least they're somewhat different. Whereas if you're trusting the feed that comes up on Facebook, that's going to be the only feed that you get. It's another step further, and Rick Sullivan in the live chat says, Notice how Facebook and other websites are linking up now. Yeah, I did notice this a couple of years ago, back when I'd still used Facebook for very limited purposes. It's one of the things that led me to stop using it altogether, is that if you forgot to log out and clear cookies from Facebook, you'd go to another website and then it would come up and say, do you want to post a comment as your name from Facebook? It's like, how do you even, oh, of course you know, because I was just there. You have to log out, you have to clear your cookies. You probably have to go even further than that now. I mean, I don't know how pervasive their technology is, but the point is, they're not just collecting the information on what you post as your photos and your status updates. They're collecting everything you do online. It is 100% PSYOP, 100% CIA and other organisation controlled. It's so obvious. It's a data honeypot. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it is a grave worry to me. I found that with Google. I'd be putting, as I'm typing something into an email in Google, the ads are coming up on the side of the page. And that's when it came. I thought, man, this is just unbelievable stuff. So I just try not to use it. I'd use it as little as possible. And that was something I was going to ask Ethan about. I'd read somewhere, well, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, that Facebook was falling out of favour with a lot of younger people. Is there any truth in that? I mean, maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but is there any truth in that? And are they, who else do they go to who wasn't that strongly controlled?
Yeah, so to me, I don't see any legitimacy in that. From the statistics I've seen personally that Facebook is just continuing to grow with popularity, because now they're buying other sites, like popular sites that are with on smartphones and social media. You know, they try to buy all of these companies, and for me, I wanted to expose this early, just because once Facebook gains control of the news, as Jono said, I was going to mention this next in just a general discussion, was that the majority of the rest of the internet, these websites and whatnot, are already through Facebook. And reports have come out this week that Facebook tracks your cookies and your data. It tracks what you do on the internet, even if you're not logged in, even if you don't have the tabs open, even if you're not a member. That's the extent that it gets to. So Facebook, in the near future or in the long future, whatever, something within me sees that Facebook could be the means for just all social interaction. It's going to be mandatory to sign up to Facebook. Facebook's going to control the majority of the internet. It's going to be, you can find everything here on Facebook, and it's just going to be a way to control the internet, and they're going to incrementally do it through first controlling the news, first buying the websites, and then incorporating Facebook through these websites and all of this to make it easier and efficient. And people are going to fall for this. And once you centralize control, not just in the physical, as we've talked about earlier with these companies and these media organizations, but online, where you can control the internet through, we don't have to shut down the internet, we don't have to censor it, we can just use something that's popular and expand it. And I think that this is very early steps for something that could be a lot bigger, Jono.
And they can use it to leverage it. So once they've got the masses, again, they know full well they can't control all of our minds. They know that better than anyone. They don't have to control all of our minds. If they can get the masses focusing on the news feeds through Facebook, whatever comes after Facebook, doesn't really matter what you call it, this basic Skynet operation where everything you do online is through one centralized platform. Once they get that, even those of us who use our own websites or independent servers, whatever, they'll find a way to make it so that we have to get licensed to be news providers, or that we have to pay a certain government regulatory fee to be allowed to broadcast ourselves, whatever. They'll bring that in. So they'll first get the masses all believing the one thing, then while they're doing that and the masses are blindsided, they'll start picking us off one by one, country by country, forcing us to get licenses to broadcast ourselves on our own platforms, till eventually there is only one legal platform. Now people will say, oh, but I know technology, I know IT, I've got mates, we can get around it. Yeah, you can get around it, but once they start making it illegal, you'll be taking a risk to get around it, you see? So that the sooner that we can get this information out to the people, the better, because the further they go down this path, the harder it's going to be for us, because what we need is the masses on our side, and once the masses are all going through one platform, they're not going to join us because they won't even know about the struggle, Lindsay.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. It is a worry to me, and I'm not quite sure how we counter this. Like we were saying before about the money, people are saying it's all very well and good complaining about it or highlighting it, but we've got to find a way around it. And maybe that's something we'll have to find people who can give us advice on how to get around this, how to put a stop to this. Because one of the things, we were talking about this subject before about not paying tax, and that was one of the things. It wasn't just BHP, it was Google, Apple. There were a number of them that fronted the parliament. So there, as well as trying to control us, they're also ripping their money out of us. So we're paying for their growth. That's the thing that worries me. Okay, I'll throw that back.
Yeah, it's terrible stuff. Well, we do have to move on. Before we do, though, Ethan, this is your segment, your topic rather. Any final thoughts?
Just I'll leave links at AWST-roundtable.com, and I'll continuously update on this, and I'm going to watch Facebook very closely from now on, because as someone who has been in this alternative media, truth movement, etc., whatever you want to label it, for the past several years, and seeing how, especially on Facebook, the TOTT News Facebook page continuously loses reach through this algorithm, because anything that is talking about truth, unless you've continuously liked and interacted with the page, it won't show up. I'm worried to see how far that's going to continue, so I'll keep everyone updated on that.
Please do. And again, we have to reiterate this 5 or 10 times an episode at AusRoundtable.com, AUSRoundtable.com. You'll find a page for every single one of our episodes, from 1 right through to 27 today and into the future. And on that page, we provide the MP3 download through Podbean. We provide the YouTube video and links to all of our source information so people can check it out for themselves and verify what we're saying. Because just as we tell you that you shouldn't, and just as you guys know that you shouldn't be trusting the TV or the mainstream media, well, you shouldn't necessarily trust us. You want to do your own information, your own research, and that's why we provide the links so you can do your own research. That's AusRoundtable.com. The second topic for international today is to do with a comedian in France, and I'm going to pronounce his name Dieudonne. It's Dieudonne Umbala. I'm going to call him Dieudonne. I hope that the pronunciation is correct. I am John LeBon. I should know this. Lindsay, what we're going to do is, to start this one off, we're going to go through the interview that you sent through to me, which piqued my interest, and then we're getting to the broad discussion. Now, I've made sure that Ethan's got a copy of the dialogue. I've got one as well. And listeners, this will all make sense soon, so just bear with us. What I'll do is, Lindsay, I'll let you choose out of the interviewer, Dieudonne, and the Muslim man. Who do you want to be?
Okay. Can I be the Muslim man?
You can be the Muslim man. So now now it's up to myself and Ethan. I'm going to flip a USB drive for you. If it comes up SanDisk, you get to be the interviewer. If it comes up the other one, then you're going to be Dieudonne, okay?
Yeah, all right. Dieudonne.
So you're Dieudonne and I'm the bad guy.
Okay.
All right. Now, listeners, what we're going to do here is we're going to do a role play. This is from 2 separate interviews, but both involved the same interviewer. And this is from a TV station in France. The first interview is between an interviewer and a Muslim man talking about freedom of speech. The second interview is between the same interviewer and comedian Dieudonne talking about freedom of speech. And you're going to notice that his tune changes very quickly between interviews. So we'll take it away then. You're Dieudonne. Okay, sweet. So I'm the interviewer. All right. So, Lindsay, you ready for the first interview?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. So I am the interviewer. But if we have to refrain from drawing cartoons of your prophet out of sensitivity to Muslims' feelings, this becomes a form of self-censorship. I feel like making a caricature of Muhammad, Jesus, or a rabbi. I should have the right to do it. This is France.
Yes, but when you know you're only going to insult millions of people, why do you do it?
It is about freedom. That is what it is all about. Now, these are verbatim quotes, listeners, so you just listened to the interviewer explaining why we need freedom of speech to a Muslim man. Now the same interviewer speaking with French comedian Dieudonne. Do you think you should have apologized for your action? You could have said, I am sorry. It isn't funny. Sorry it hurt your feelings. It was stupid of me.
It is a part of my job. The comedy I play has to have those few lines.
I can't understand you. I am shocked. I find your action inexcusable.
We live in a country where we can freely express ourselves. Why are you against?
I'm going to tell you why you don't have the right to freely express yourself. Because of the Holocaust. That's why your comedy creates a little problem.
But for 400 years, we have also sent hundreds of millions of blacks to slavery, and that doesn't prevent us from making comedy with black characters. We have seen Michelle Lead stand up comedy with an ape dressed with an eyeglass like a black. Nobody stopped or criticized him. He was even hailed as a hero.
For someone who has had all his family exterminated at the concentration camps, and he sees someone on TV saying, Israel, do you realize the severity of the situation? I don't think you do. There are many instances where we have told well-known people, we can't have you on the show. It is no longer possible. Like Lancerill, whom will never be invited to this program because of what he said. We can no longer invite him on this program. Do you realize how serious what he said?
I find it hard to believe I was able to do comedy about any group of people. I make a sketch about an Israeli and all of a sudden it is hysteria.
Tell you the truth, I find you an excellent comedian. You are very funny, talented. but I'm sorry to inform you that this is the last time you are invited on the show.
If I'm never invited again, then be it. I have dignity and a conscience I can't violate.
Are you ready to admit? What apology are you ready to make? Okay, now we love the. Thank you, listeners, for bearing with us. We love the role plays. Those are actual quotes. Obviously, these are translated from the French, but that was the same interviewer when speaking to a Muslim man saying, "We have to be allowed to criticize your Prophet Muhammad, even though it's offensive to you. We're all free. This is France." Then when speaking to comedian Dieudonne saying, "Oh, no, 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 you can't say things that are offensive." Of course, the only difference between the two was one was a Muslim man and one was a man criticizing the Jews. Lindsay, we'll throw it to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, it just what tickled my fancy when I read it. It was just so blatant. It was almost like a caricature of news or television. I just loved it, and I watched a couple of this comedian's YouTube videos before, and he is a very, very funny man. So yeah, so I thought this is it's funny, and it's a good way of getting the message across to people of just how compromised these journalists are, even in France. Okay, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, good. I'll throw it to you then.
Yeah, Lindsay, it goes back to that saying, speaking about if you want to know who's in control, learn who you can't criticize. And we spoke about this on the show before about the hypocrisy about how they're pushing two different agendas that always conflict with each other when you really look at it, because they want to train us that Muslims are the enemy, they want to train us that Islam is a bad religion, a death cult, as Tony Abbott wants to speak about it, that the Muslim religion's bad, that you can't do all of this sort of stuff. But yet, whenever you try to criticize other religions for arguably doing some different things and some of the same things in the same fashion, criticizing it with facts behind it, which the media don't have, criticizing it with facts and direct quotes, you're shut down, and it just shows you who really is in control. Because, Jono, if you can't criticize a certain group of people, you need to question why.
Yeah, and that quote, to learn who rules over you, find out those who you can't criticize, it's often attributed to Voltaire. I think it might be a misattribution, but like we've said on this show before, it doesn't matter who said it, it's a truism. Who are you not allowed to criticize? And as we just learned from that one interviewer, there's one group who you aren't allowed to criticize. And I want to read out more about this Dieudonne's character because, as I explained before to listeners, Lindsay sends through the list of topics that he wants to talk about. We sit down as a group, discuss what we want to talk about, and try and fit into 2 hours. Because we could do a 5-hour show. We've got so much to talk about. We try and make sure that we each get a fair turn to bring out the topics that we like. I read your agenda this morning, Lindsay, and this particular topic, I'd heard of Dieudonne after the whole Charlie Hebdo thing. This was the comedian who got in trouble for criticizing the Jews after Charlie Hebdo. So at the very same time that people were saying, "Je suis Charlie, we should be able to criticize anyone," this guy was getting persecuted for criticizing Jews. And the hypocrisy was just so obvious. Well, I did a bit more research this morning because you brought this topic up, Lindsay. I want to read out a couple of articles so people get an idea of who this guy is. And again, we'll provide all the links at Roundtable.com, including links to his comment, which I think many of you will appreciate. But before we get to that, let me read this one out. This is from the BBC, 18 March 2015. Dieudonne guilty of condoning terrorism with Charlie Hebdo comment. Quote, the controversial French comedian Dieudonne Mbala has been found guilty of condoning terrorism. He had posted on Facebook, "I feel like Charlie Koulibaly," just days after the Paris attacks in January. The post combined the "Je suis Charlie" slogan with the name of one of the 3 gunmen involved in the attacks, which included a mass shooting at the Charlie Hebdo satirical magazine. Dieudonne was given a 2-month suspended sentence by the Paris court. Dieudonne posted the comment on Facebook in French, "Je me sens Charlie Koulibaly," following a huge march in Paris to condemn the attacks in which 17 people were killed. And quote, now I know that most of our listeners know that the Charlie Hebdo attacks was a complete false flag hoax. Let's put that aside for a moment. This guy has been found guilty of condoning terrorism for posting on his Facebook that he felt like one of the gunmen. So and by the way, a lot of our listeners are into fakeologists, and they're well aware that those massive marches of Je suis Charlie, that was media fakery as well. Yeah. It wasn't millions of people. It wasn't even thousands of people. It was maybe hundreds at best. But again, let's just pretend that there were thousands of people marching through the streets of Paris saying, "Je suis Charlie." You know, we are the person who criticizes anybody, and we should be free. Like we all care for freedom. He's saying, yeah, well, you feel like Charlie. Well, I feel like the gunman. I feel like I'm a terrorist being persecuted in my own country. For doing that, he was persecuted. He was given a 2-month suspended prison sentence for his Facebook comment saying that he feels like the sin terrorist involved in the Charlie hoax attacks. In other words, for saying he feels persecuted, he was persecuted. And again, you can check all this for yourself, Roundtable.com. And make no mistake, he has been persecuted. These are his words in the days following the Hebdo hoax, as republished in an article by The Telegraph. Quote, and this is Dieudonne again, quote, "Yesterday we were all Charlie. We all walked and stood up for freedoms to be allowed to laugh at everything. Yet when I came back home, I felt all alone. The government has been targeting me for a year now and is still looking to eliminate me by any means. Media lynching, ban on my performance shows, tax audits, bailiff raids, searches, indictments. More than 80 judicial procedures have struck down on my kinfolk and me. Since the beginning of last year, I have been treated as public enemy number one, when all I do is make people laugh and laugh about death because death laughs at us all, as Charlie knows now, unfortunately. I am looked upon as if I were Amity Coulibaly when I am no different from Charlie," end quote. And the government has been doing this, banning his shows, conducting raids and searches on him, more than 80 judicial procedures for a comedian telling jokes about Jews. And to understand what kind of media persecution he's talking about, I want to read out one of the litany of articles which have been printed in the mainstream media press to demonize Dieudonne. Now, this one's from the New Yorker. Now, it's a long and comical article. Comical for us. It's not meant to be comical, but you need to read it for yourself to believe it. I'm just going to read out my favorite section. Now, this is a relatively short excerpt from the article, but it is lengthy, so I ask the listeners to bear with me here. This is from the New Yorker. The Case of Dieudonne, a French comedian's hate. January 10, 2014. Okay, quote, "For many young people, especially those who are descendants of North African and African immigrants and who may feel like second-class citizens in French society, the attempts to silence Dieudonne have made him a hero. Efforts in the past to prevent him from performing, invoking the potential danger of public disorder, have not been very successful. The fear is that this latest effort to close down his act will backfire and increase his following. Dieudonne has made a career out of walking and often crossing a fine line between mocking racial stereotypes and using them. He got his start in the 1990s working with a Jewish comedian named Elie Semoun. The two formed an odd couple of French comedy, the funny-looking little Jewish kid and the big black man. Their act consisted mostly of reciprocal insults, with some gay bashing mixed in. After watching many Elie and Dieudonne videos, I have to confess that I found nothing witty or funny in them. In one, Dieudonne says to his Jewish partner, the Germans should have finished the job in 1945. Some of this clearly anticipates Dieudonne's recent round of Holocaust jokes and crude anti-Semitism, but it did not engender controversy in the 90s, in part because Dieudonne had a Jewish sidekick returning insult for insult. In the context of a society struggling to deal with multiculturalism, careening between deeply held racist impulses and new forms of political correctness, their routine seems to offer the possibility of dealing more freely with cultural and ethnic difference, in the manner of Lenny Bruce. Dieudonne ran for Parliament in 1997 in open opposition to the far right and anti-immigrant National Front, making it more difficult at that point to see his spoofing as racist. But after 1997, he stopped performing with his Jewish partner, and during the aughts, his increasingly tasteless anti-Semitic routines, without any counterbalancing, appeared more and more single-mindedly hateful. Almost done. In 2003, Dieudonne appeared on French TV dressed as an Orthodox Jew and performs the Nazi salute while crying, Israel. In 2006, he invited Robert Forreston, a French historian, shut up, Lindsay, a French historian who has repeatedly denied the existence of the Holocaust, on stage. In the same year, he began appearing in public with Jean-Marie Le Pen, the founder of the National Front, who has made immigrant bashing his political stock in trade, and who once referred to the Holocaust as a detail of history. Dieudonne's recent appearances and videos are often long, rambling rants in which the Jewish lobby and the Israel lobby are portrayed as pulling the strings above everything. He posted a video reply to French President François Hollande, which begins with a long riff on what Dieudonne calls Shoah-nanas, which combines the Shoah, the Hebrew word for the Holocaust, with the French word for pineapples, ananas. The video goes on for several minutes about how singing Shoah-nanas will cure a variety of ills, including migraines and sexual dysfunction. At another point, without connecting directly to the Jews, Dieudonne portrays himself as a victim. The slave masters, the master bankers say work, and if you say no, you're a bad slave, you're a racist, end quote. Now, that was a long, lengthy readout. I thank the listeners for their patience. The reason why I wanted to read out all of that is to make a few key points. Here's what I took from that article. 1, Dieudonne was allowed to make jokes about Jews so long as he had a Jewish sidekick. Now that he does his work solo, he's not allowed to make jokes about the Jews. Think about that. Point number 2, he ran in 1997 against the National Front. In fact, his history is one of a man who is clearly against racism, and his black heritage gives some indication as to why. He has always been a comedian who uses satire to deride racism, and I probably didn't point that out. This guy is black, okay? And they're accusing him of being racist, even though in 1997 he ran against the National Front. Point number 3, he criticizes the Jewish lobby and the Israel lobby and says the banksters are slave masters. So he's clearly speaking too much truth. And point 4, and most importantly, the attacks upon him by the government and the mainstream media and their attempts to censor him are only making him more popular. And this is very important for reasons that we can come back to shortly. But just quickly, I want to reread one section from that article. In 2003, Dieudonne appeared on French TV dressed as an Orthodox Jew and performed the Nazi salute while crying Israel. And that was what was referenced in that interview that we mentioned earlier. That was his crime, saying Israel. In 2006, he invited Robert Forreston, a French historian who has repeatedly denied the existence of the Holocaust, on stage. In the same year, he began appearing in public with Jean-Marie Le Pen, the founder of the National Front, who has made immigrant bashing his political in-stock in trade, who once referred to the Holocaust as a detail of history. The humanity, the horror. These are his crimes, saying Israel. How dare he? The Holocaust, a detail of history. How racist, how terrible this man is. Now, and again, I thank the listeners for bearing with me, I want to play a clip here of Jamie Foxx. Okay, this is Jamie Foxx on the Saturday Night Live show from 2012. This is a clip of Jamie Foxx, the black so-called comedian from the Saturday Night Live. This is a 30-second clip of him talking about his then recently released film, Django Unchained.
And I got a movie coming out, Django, check it out. Leonardo DiCaprio, Samuel Jackson. Django Unchained, I play a slave. How black is that? And in the movie, I have to wear chains. How whack is that? But don't be worried about it, because I get out the chains, I get free, I save my wife, and I kill all the white people in the movie.
Now, the audio probably wasn't very good there. I want to play that last bit again with the audio just increased a little bit. Again, this is Jamie Foxx on a mainstream American outlet.
My wife, and I kill all the white people in the movie.
And just one more time.
Because I get out the chains, I get free, I save my wife, and I kill all the white people in the movie. How great is that?
Yeah, so that's Jamie Foxx saying, I get to kill all the white people in the movie. How great is that? And they're all laughing. Now, putting aside the fact that many of those people cheering Fox's anti-white jokes are self-hating whites, brainwashed by the Talmud vision and the so-called education system into hating their own heritage, what we see here is a man making jokes at one race's expense. No uproar. Now, I'm personally happy for people like Fox to be allowed to make such jokes. Clowns like him are not my cup of tea, but if other people find that crap funny, then I say let them pay their money and listen to jokes about white genocide. Go for it. I believe in freedom of expression and freedom of thought. The issue is that Dieudonne is being persecuted for making jokes about the Jews, and the intelligent person has to ask the simple question, why the hypocrisy? The answer is blatantly obvious to anybody who does even an ounce of independent research. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Jono. I think, once again, it goes back to who you can't criticize and how this is happening to people that when you look at it and you actually do the history behind it, haven't, it's the complete opposite of what they've done. And I think what I gathered from the article was he's subliminally pushing a message of this is how we should talk about things freely, pushing the notion that it's free to talk about these things. I have a Jewish sidekick with me on stage. We can talk about these things, and trying to get that notion through to the people because our language has been destroyed. We've been taught to believe that things are bad when it's completely the different case. So I think that he was trying to do that, and it's what I gathered from the act, but it's just ridiculous. I mean, I don't see how people can be persecuted just so easily for that. Yet what we talked about earlier, when in a Senate inquiry, multinational corporations just say, I refuse to answer questions and break the law multiple times, they can blatantly do these sort of things and never get prosecuted for it, you know what I mean? And this guy just, with a history of being anti-racist, of running against these parties, of being black himself, is being called a racist, and without the back history as you've just given, most people will just believe that, and they'll continue on and say, yes, anti-Semitism is still a prominent thing in the 21st century, and it's bad, and we need to stop it.
Yeah, and we've spoken a number of times on this show about how the powers that be have to be masters of doublethink, of getting people to believe two things that are contrary at the exact same time. And on the one hand, with that Charlie Hebdo hoax attack, just pretend for a moment the attack was real, okay? For argument's sake, because most people out there just believe this nonsense. Suppose the Hebdo attacks were real. The Je suis Charlie thing was, we are Charlie. We should be free to criticize Islam. We should be free to criticize anybody. At the exact same time, this guy's being prosecuted for criticizing the Jews in the same country, and he got a 2-month prison sentence. Now, that was suspended. What that means is if he trips up again, he'll be behind bars for telling jokes. And if you go and click the links on Roundtable.com to the YouTube videos that I was watching this morning of this guy doing his comedy, I'm pretty confident most of our listeners will be laughing along with him. And he had a whole audience of people laughing with him. They pay the money, they go and watch him tell jokes, and he's being told that he's going to go to prison if he keeps on doing that. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah. I think it's actually more than that. I've been following for a few years, and he has this, you know the Heil Hitler thing where the arm goes up in a salute. He has something called the quenelle. And I remember a few years ago, people were doing it, instead of going up in the air, it goes down, and then the other arm comes across it to grasp the tricep. And he's been doing that, and it spread to football matches. And they were actually getting people doing it in football matches. And it's a no-no, because what it's about, it's not a Heil Hitler, of course. It's a symbol of the Jewish control of everything. And I think that's so they've got to put a stop to this, or it could get carried away. I think that's how they're viewing it. It's all very well and good to have somebody criticizing it, but when you get the whole population in public on television all doing the quenelle, the next thing you know, they'll be taking us off to camps. Yeah, I'll throw that back to you.
I was doing research into that this morning as well, Lindsay. I should explain the quenelle. It's called La Quenelle, is a signal or a salute that Dieudonne does. And again, this is a big black man. And the signal is he puts one hand across his chest and his other hand bent straight towards the ground. So if you were to raise his arm, 90 degrees, it would look like a Sieg Heil. It would look like that. And he's been accused of anti-Semitism for doing the signal. He says it's not about that at all. He says it's just a signal that he likes to do to fight against the system. Maybe he does want to do it as like a Sieg Heil, but this is the way he thinks he can get away with it, whatever. But take a step back. It's an arm signal. The idea, if you actually think that if even doing a Sieg Heil, right? Suppose he was blatantly doing a Sieg Heil and wearing one of those Charlie Chaplin mustaches, so what? Yeah. The idea that you would put people behind bars for doing this is utterly ridiculous, and people are so brainwashed right now. They're taught, if we do a video of Jamie Foxx laughing about killing the white people, no problem. A white person says anything negative about the Jews, he wants to exterminate the Jews. It's utterly, and this guy's not even white. If a black guy does a Sieg Heil, it means he wants to exterminate the Jews. It's utterly ridiculous. That's how far the brainwashing has gone, and I have to admit, I went through the Australian education system, okay? I grew up watching television. I used to believe all of this nonsense. And that's probably one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this topic, is because I think once you've been brainwashed into nonsense, if you ever do recover, if you ever pull yourself out of that, like I've done, you look back and you're not just angry at what they're doing to the system, you're a little bit angry at what they did to you. They convinced me of a whole bunch of nonsense things, and yeah, it pisses me off. It should piss you off because you've been lied to in a big way, and now they're trying to say that if you ever want to find out the truth for yourself and talk about it, they're going to put you behind bars. It's nonsense. Now, we are coming towards the end of the program, so I want to wrap this topic up, but it is a very important topic. So I'll go around the panel, we'll get our final thoughts on Dieudonne, and again, for our listeners, go to our website, check out the links for yourself, not just the large text that I read out, but check out this guy's comedy, because there's nobody in Australia doing anything like this. I know for a fact, because once upon a time I tried, and I got crickets. I'll tell you more about that on Sunday sessions. Lindsay, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, look, we've pretty much covered it. What I'd like to recommend to people, if they haven't, I mean, probably all our listeners have already seen this, but if you haven't, go onto YouTube and you'll just find a mass of his stuff. He's a very funny man, and even if you haven't got a political interest in it, just sit and listen to him. He's a very, very funny comedian. That I'd recommend it. And you never know. With a bit of luck, we might even get a quenelle. What would you call them? A band of quenelle girls at the football in future.
Yeah, Lindsay. That's my final thought. Is I'm actually going to go watch this guy from now on, because I hadn't heard of him much. I'm a fan of comedy, but once you see how the control is within comedy and how how brainwashed and manipulated the comedy scene is, not just in Australia but around the world. I've sort of just stepped back a bit from it ever since, you know, people like Carlin and whatnot haven't been on the scene. It's been a bit disheartening, but I'll definitely go and look this guy up, Jono.
Yeah, it's well worth it. And really, like I said, I heard of him a long time ago. It was one of those things I wanted to look further into. Lindsay's agenda prompted me to go and do that. I'm glad I did, because I've now found someone who I can look up to again. And one of the great tragedies of doing the kind of research that we do and being interested in what we think is the truth and the reality is that over time you lose respect for more and more people, whether it's bands you grew up listening to or comedians you grew up listening to or thinkers who you used to read and you know, try and emulate their great thinking. You realize more and more that they were either controlled or misdirected or just not really thinking as hard as they should be. So when you finally do come across someone and you're like, not only is this guy talented, but he's speaking about what I think is important, and he's doing it in the face of being charged to go to prison, this is a heroic person. Now, I have to do more research into him, find out more about his background. I've been scarred so many times now, Ethan, that I don't, you know, find myself passionately following someone like I used to. But based on what I've seen of this guy, he seems like a genuine hero in a time where there aren't many heroes left. So again, I urge all of our listeners to go and check out ozroundtable.com and check out Dieudonne. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Time to move on to our final thoughts, though, because we're coming towards the end of the program. You know what? We have got a couple of minutes, and it would be remiss of us not to talk about the Boston bombings. The old hoaxathon. Lindsay, we were lucky enough back on episode 17 to be joined by PK, who's also known as PK22, PK Boston, and that man has broken down that hoax for the hoax that it is, and you can't watch his videos and not realize the whole thing was a hoax. Some people will get halfway through a video, stop it, never come back. They don't want to realize the whole thing was a hoax, but it was. Our listeners know it was. Anyone who does their research will know that it was. Complete hoax. Lindsay, what say you?
Yeah. And I was looking at a Jim Stone site here, maybe only a month or two ago, and he had the same thing. All the photographs, just conclusive evidence. All the fellas looking like coppers standing around with bags on their back, and then you see the bag after the explosion, and it's not the same one as these poor blokes who are now before court. It's the same as these military types, we'll call them that. The short haircut, the whole bit. It's just so conclusive. And I remember talking about this before on one of the shows. You know, you had the fellow with the fake legs blown off and the fake blood on the ground. It just goes on, and there's so much about it that was just so obviously rubbish and garbage, and yet this poor fellow's been found guilty in a court. And the thing that gets me is, how did they manage to falsify it in court? The judge must be as crooked as they come, or what do they do? Now, I remember Ethan talking about the other one, the Batman thing, I think it was, where the fellow was drugged to the eyeballs every time he was in court, or maybe they did this to this bloke as well. I don't know, but I can't take it seriously, and I just feel really sorry. What have we got to do? I mean, obviously it's in America, it's not here, but what have we got to do to get justice for these poor buggers who are being railroaded? Anyway, I'll throw it back to you. I sort of feel frustrated.
Yeah, Lindsay, you're not the only one, mate. I looked at that from the same perspective. I said, well, if this is the case, if this rubbish event that was completely staged from the get-go, with all of these fake victims that were all made on the wheelchair, that we've just broken down, and on episode 17 of the Australian Roundtable, if you go check that out, PK. We were speaking about that, some of his experiences with, uncovering that, because he was one of the first Australian YouTubers, or one of the first in the world, that were exposing this event. And I wanted to know is how they found him guilty. Did the court case even happen? Is he still alive, or did they just tell us that he's been found guilty to try and close the gap on it? What is happening that all of a sudden this just comes out, yeah, he was found guilty, we're going to close the door on Boston now? How did that get away in a court of law? How was everyone in on it? There's no way that this could happen. If there was a jury there, a legitimate jury looking at this evidence to convict this man of doing it, there was no way that would have happened.
Well, this is why if I do go before a court of law and they find me guilty, I'll think, well, at least I exist to be found guilty. This guy, it doesn't really look like he exists. I don't think he was in the courtroom. In fact, I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with fakeologists. A lot of you aren't. They're a group I've been spending more time looking into lately. I'm not going to vouch for all of what they do. I never do that anymore. I've been burnt too many times. But I'm starting to come to the view that it wasn't just a staged event hoax, that all of this is essentially just media fakery. And I'm not sure that Jocker even exists, at least the way that we're told that he does. The one thing I will say is, whereas with Sandy Hook we know that nobody died, nobody got hurt, and I feel like on 9/11 nobody died, nobody got hurt. With this Boston bombing, so I'm still open-minded to the possibility that maybe that brother might have existed, because of course we found out the news that he'd been basically assassinated by the FBI, the CIA, one of those spaghetti alphabet companies who took him in, and then we saw all the photos. But even that could just be doctored to throw people like me off the track. I mean, we don't really know. What we do know is that we're lied to by the TV all the time, and now they're telling us that this guy was found guilty. And of course, for those who aren't familiar with all this, remember that after the so-called bombings, they basically instituted martial law in Newport, wherever that city was. Where basically, you can find videos of this. I'll put links to this on Roundtable.com, where basically American citizens in a quiet, sleepy little suburb were told by men in armored personnel carriers to get back in their houses. And there were teams of people more decked out than the Iraq invaders of 2003, just going house to house, telling people to get inside. It was the martial law lockdown, all part of a huge psyop. And if you're not familiar with all of this, it's time to start doing some research, because shit is a lot more real than you think. But it is time to wrap up the show. We're up to 2 hours, so we'll go around the table, get our final thoughts. Of course, for live listeners, stay tuned. We'll go to the Q&A, just like we always do. And of course, at 7 p.m. Brisbane time, which is in about an hour 45, we'll have Sunday sessions with John LeBon. Of course, we've got a couple of people coming to the studio to join us for that one, Ethan, which I can't wait for. More on that in a moment. But first, Lindsay, any final thoughts for episode 27 of the Australian Roundtable podcast?
No, I'm just trying to think. No, I know what it was. Look, can I just make a rider? I did it last week after we'd finished the official broadcast, and just for people who listen, after the event, can I just make announcement about the Brigalow Corporation? Because I've been asked about it some time ago, and I've put everything up on a 4-shared site, and also I was asked about Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy, and I've put that up on the 4-share site. So if we can put those links, you might have already done it last week or the week before, but if we can put those links on, and people who are interested in those two items can go and find them on the 4-shared link. Thank you for that.
No worries, mate. It's always good to have you on board, and the show is so much better with you, mate. I still go back sometimes and check out old episodes to get reference material, whatever, and it's really good having you on board, mate. So hopefully you'll stick around for the Q&A with us after the show. Ethan, any final thoughts for episode 27?
Just speaking on how we've talked about this episode about corporate interests and how the internet is in danger and all of these things. I just want to encourage everyone to go to AusRoundtable.com, go to AustralianRoundtable.podbean.com, download our MP3s, burn them to discs, create an archive of yourself, because we don't know how long this could remain online. We've lasted 27 weeks when, I'm sure a lot of us didn't think that we'd last this long, especially talking about the topics that we're doing, and we can't get ahead of ourselves because we never know what's around the corner. So I encourage everyone to make a catalogue of our back history. If you enjoy the show, if you want the show to still have an archive, I encourage everyone to do that, because once we all have it, it's going to exist there. And what are they going to do? Come and take it from each one of us individually? It's the same as the community. If we all branch out in a diverse sort of way, then that will remain there forever. So I just want to encourage everyone to please utilize the Podbean account. Even if you don't listen to the podcast on Podbean, if you listen to them through YouTube, still go to the Podbean account, which is embedded at AusRoundtable.com, AUSRoundtable.com, download the episodes on MP3 and make a backup of that, John.
Yeah, that's really well said. And we made the point last week that we appreciate, because we've got several offers now, people offering to donate us money. They say, hey, I've been spending $50 on News Corp. I want to give you guys money for the work that you do, and we really appreciate that. And we will come up very shortly with a method to, so that if people want to give us money, we don't ask, but if you want to, we'll accept it and try and put it towards good causes. At the same time, though, money is only one thing. If you want to help us, there are other things you can do that don't involve money. One of them is sharing what we do, whether it's with friends and family by word of mouth, posting it to Facebook, or posting it to your own blog, or maybe even starting your own blog. I mean, if you want advice on how to start a blog, we're happy to offer it to you. Get in touch with us via Skype. I'll sit down with you on Skype for an hour, like one-on-one, just talking you through. I'll even give you free hosting. I mean, I've got reseller hosting account. I can afford to host people's blogs for free, you know what I mean? Like for $10, you can have a domain and have your own website. And then you can use that website to get your own thoughts out there and also propagate the work that we're doing as well. I mean, there's so many things that you can do to help us, and most of them just involve spreading the word. And I reiterate what Ethan just said there. Yeah, please do, if you can. I know it will take you a little while, but if you could download a few of our episodes and burn them to a disk, even just for your own safekeeping, whatever, we don't know. I mean, we like to think that Podbean will give us more time than YouTube. If YouTube ever shuts us down, we'll still have Podbean. We like to think that, but we don't know that for sure. It could just come in one big hit, both are gone. So please do. I mean, we've got backups. I've got backups of backups. Ethan's got backups, but who knows what's going to happen to us. I mean, I'm not saying anything bad's going to happen to us, but the more people out there who, I don't think it will, but the more people who have backups of the work that we're doing, the more chance it's going to last into the future. And we do this show partly for the people who listen live. We've had about 50 people watching live throughout the show. We appreciate that. But we also partly do the show because this research needs to be out there. I wish I could go back to 96 and listen to podcasts of dudes talking about the false flag at Port Arthur. I wish I could go back and listen to them doing podcasts about it. It would help me for my research today. We don't have that. Hopefully in 10 or 15 years' time, people will still have the work that we're doing on ARP, and they can build off that. For me, a lot of my motivation for doing this show is for the archival purposes. And the best way to archive it is to save the stuff. So please, if you can, I hate to drone on about it, but if you can save this stuff, please do. It would mean a lot to us. A couple more final thoughts. Sunday session, 7 p.m. with John LeBon. That'll be in just over an hour and a half. And we're going to have in the live studio with us, Ethan, Enchanted Wanderer. And she's coming down with her hubby as well. So we're going to have a few people in the house, a few brews, and hopefully some good chat. So hopefully the Australian listeners can stick around for us with us for that. That's, like I said, in about an hour and 45 minutes. I'll put the link up on John LeBon very shortly. And hopefully Lindsay can join us for that one as well. And one final shout-out for the Podbean account. For those who aren't aware, AustralianRoundtable.podbean.com. If you don't listen to this on YouTube on delay, that's fine. We get the Podbean updates done usually within a week. Now, I know that's not as early as some people might like, but sometimes it takes us longer than we'd like, but each episode is up there within a week, and you can just download that as an MP3 format. I want to thank everyone for listening to the show live. We've had about 50 live listeners. Thanks for all the comments. And we're going to go to a Q&A right now, but if you're listening on delay or through the archive, this is the end of the episode. This has been April 12, 2015, episode 27. Lindsay the Silver Fox, Ethan Nash of TTT News, and myself, John LeBon. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at 3 p.m. Brisbane time next week.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, that bye-bye is not making the final cut, mate. So. All right.